Live. Welcome to another Break the Rules stream. I am your host, Lev Polyakov, LevPo on Twitter. We are here with our next Argue My Position. We have got Armand, we have got the Prudentialist, and we also have our guest, Joel Davis, Jake, and of course the great Giovanni Penicietti coming at you all the way live, ladies and gentlemen. This is going to be a real fun one. We're going to be talking about democracy, and specifically representative democracy. Just so we're clear, we're not talking full Athenian slave trade democracy here. We're talking specifically about the democracy that we've experienced more or less, more or less in the United States. So anyway, to get this started, before we even define what democracy is, in this case, I first just want some introductions. Armand, can you tell the good people a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Armand Domalewski. I'm I would say progressive activist in the San Francisco Bay Area. I have a background in data analytics and economics, as well as have worked in politics in the past. And in the words of Emperor Palpatine, I love democracy, so it'll be fun to argue against it.
Excellent. And the Prudentialist, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I run a political commentary channel. I would may say more so. I'm on the right wing of the political spectrum here in the United States. I have a background in history and law, and I've worked in political campaigns, nonprofit, and media sector. So it'll be fun arguing for a system that I'm pretty skeptical against.
Excellent. And again, for the people who are watching this, let us know how the sound is. I want to make sure everything's good with the sound, good for the audio, and let's go right into it. Let's define what democracy is, specifically the representative democracy. Who wants to define it first? Armand, would you like to go for it?
Sure. I didn't realize that's just to have a precise definition, but I would say democracy is a form of government that is meant to more or less represent the will of the majority of the people in the nation that it governs. It can range from everything to like the direct democracy, but we'll more focus on when you elect people to represent you.
All right, and Prudentialist, do you agree with that definition?
For the sake of us arguing today, I think that that's a decent definition to go off of.
Excellent. So, Armand, you have the first point to make as far as why you hate this system of democracy so much.
Wait, Lev, maybe we
yes?
should go pro-democracy then anti.
Well, we had a talk in the background before. I think Prudentialist,
yeah.
you want to go second, right?
If that's all right.
Absolutely,
okay,
yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So, Armand, go for it, my friend.
Sure. So, famous philosopher, scholar, and intellectual Taylor Swift once said, "No amount of freedom gets you clean. I've still got all of you on me. And no amount of freedom will get a society clean because you'll still have the mess of voters all over you." So, a couple reasons why I think democracy is a bad system. I think we should evaluate this based on net benefits. The idea of, on balance, does this system benefit more people more? Does it do the most good for the most people? And is it on balance harmful? So, first thing is voters don't know what they're talking about. I think you need to evaluate every system with a competence principle. The idea is that anyone or any deliberative body that exercises power over anybody else should have an obligation to use that power in good faith. You wouldn't want a doctor who hasn't gone to med school, like you wouldn't want a lawyer that hasn't gone to law school. You wouldn't want a plumber that doesn't know how to plumb. And in the same way, a voter that doesn't know how to vote shouldn't have power over you and if they don't have the competence. Part of the problem is that like democracy is not really set up for voters to make good decisions because the incentives don't make any sense. Every single individual vote, no matter how small the election, it's going to be a tiny, 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 tiny fraction of the larger electorate, which means that if you spend more than 5 minutes researching and understanding rationally, like what is the right decision to make, you've already like made a bad economic decision for yourself because the way that you're going to shift the system by like your individual vote, which is not enough for you to like really spend a lot of time or energy or have a lot of stake in making sure that it works. And so of course people don't because they've got lives to deal with and they don't have the right incentives. And so what ends up happening is like a third of American voters, according to Ilya Salmon's Democracy and Political Ignorance, a seminal paper on this issue, believe that the Marxist slogan, "from each according to his ability to each according to his need," is in the Constitution. A third of them also cannot name even one of the branches of the United States government, and a quarter of them don't even know who their senator is. So less than a quarter know who their senators are, and less than half even know the state has two of them. So of course the outcomes we get aren't going to be good because the voters aren't rational. There's no incentive for them to be rational. And in fact, like economist Brian Kaplan suggested that ignorance actually in their research might be like something that voters like, because voters experience a lot of psychological distress when they're presented with facts that counter to like what they want to believe. And so, for example, in a situation, if you ask, like, let's say a liberal voter statistics about climate change, and then you present to them the statistics that counter that, they get really stressed out. They're unhappy. They don't like it. And the same goes for conservative voters when you present them statistics on, let's say, gun rights or gun statistics in the United States. Finding things that are factually true that disagree with their existing opinion is actually like something that makes them feel bad. And so their incentives are not to get to the truth and make good decisions. Their incentives are to do what makes them happy. The last thing I'll say about this is that voters don't even like politics. Like, we'd be doing them a favor. Michael P. McDonald, a professor in the Department of Political Science, University of Florida, found that when you do like a whole bunch of studies on where people like to spend their time on, what they enjoy, like politics is always dead last. It is a miserable, grueling thing. And yet we force people to like undergo it day after day. Next one, quickly, let's just talk about the economy. It's part of the problem with democracy is that it's always short-term thinking. You're always thinking about how can I win the next election? How can I beat the polls? Because it's driven by this desire to like win this next race, but it means that you're not thinking about long-term like economic and scientific problems, right? Like, you're gonna not worry about the pensions you're going to pay your workers like 10 years from now, because that's way a ways away. You're not going to worry about infrastructure because that costs money today. You're not going to worry about climate change as much because those voters, you're not thinking about the ones 30 years from now, you're thinking about the ones today. A good way to like illustrate this is India versus China. Both countries pretty much started in the last like 50 years at a roughly equivalent point of economic development. China became an authoritarian capitalist state. India became a capitalist semi-democratic state. What you found is because of the democratic processes in India, they stifle like decision-making or really bureaucratic. India is now ranked 68th of 138 countries for overall infrastructure, way behind China, which is ranked 42nd. And it's had effects on the economy. For India, their economy is far significantly below China's and has been growing less. And so you see this happen in other places too. So, for example, political scientist Jonathan Krykhaus found that in Latin America, emergence of democracy actually restrained economic growth because voters tend to elect politicians who restrain trade. And that caused more conflict amongst the states because they focus on sort of like short-term xenophobic like incentives rather than thinking about the longer picture. It actually hurt the economy and made people poorer. So I think for those two reasons, the voters don't know what they're doing, and the short-term incentives of democracy prevent us from solving long-term problems, democracy's bad.
Excellent, Armand. Thank you so much for that. Before we get to the Prudentialist, any comments from the panel?
Well, one would be the equation of rationality in politics, but specifically this sort of equation with democracy and the good and democracy with rationality. I think that's probably something, we could discuss further, but that's, a pretty clear undercurrent.
And Joel, what do you think, my friend?
There seems to be like a presupposition of democracy in what he's saying that like if everyone was rational and able to make good decisions, then democracy would be correct. But the idea that even if everyone was rational and making good decisions doesn't necessarily mean democracy would be correct. I mean, like who's like it can be rational to make to abuse people, to make, so if you have 51% of the population decide rationally that it's in their interest to like murder the other 49% of the population, is this necessarily a good thing? Possibly not. The idea also you have in democracy is that it's kind of predicated on this idea, well, if we have these two different sides, the left and the right, generally then they're going to be forced to compromise with one another because they have to like coexist within the same democratic system. But this is actually complete bullshit. Usually what happens is that they end up contesting each other for more and more power, because it's kind of like a winner takes all. In representative democracy, it's not like the left and the right govern in a coalition. Either one governs or the other governs, generally speaking. And so they have to kind of subjugate and dominate the other, and try and like rig the system, or develop like hegemony over one another to kind of maintain domination. Whereas if you have like an autocrat, maybe they would actually give you a compromise between different factions in society, because they don't really need to side with one or the other, but they can kind of give one side a little bit of what they want, one side a little bit of what they want. Neither side is going to be completely happy, but at the same time, they're both going to be appeased. So sometimes, you need imposition from above, much like if you have like a brother and sister fighting in the backseat of the car, you need dad to like turn around and like whack both of them and say like, be nice to each other, and then they can have peace. But they would never like come to a peaceful negotiation. They would just be like, they just continue fighting or whatever. So I think it's the same thing with society in many ways.
Interesting. Well, I want to get the Prudentialist on here about this. Well, not specifically about what you said, although Prudentialist, if you want to also use what Joel was talking about right now to basically completely besmirch it and proclaim it to be absolute bullshit, go right ahead, my friend.
So are we moving now to my points, or are we
yes, we are moving to your points.
Okay, so I will start with 3 points sort of on the pro-democracy side, and then I will address what was made on the anti-democracy points. So we'll start off today by acknowledging that if we're going to be debating this in the format of a representative democracy, we have to recognize that there's probably a system within that where it's more indirect. Our system of voters in place, we're not going to have the most direct access to our government. That's why we have these representatives in place. That's the definition we went by. With that being said, we can see why democracy in our modern sense is the reason why we should be voting for that position. The first point is that of being harm and violence reduction. The democracy is a simulacra for civil war. It allows us to exercise thymos, or our political will to power, while not necessarily engaging in sort of kinetic civil conflict. Anytime that we have regime change or shifts in power throughout history, we've always seen it to be violent. We've had numerous wars of succession throughout human history, and through the forms of democratic process through an elected government, we obviously have a more bloodless, peaceful, nor on aggregate transition of power than we do through authoritarian or hereditary systems. Whether it's the divine right of kings or a hereditary monarchy, a bad heir or the lack thereof has caused countless wars throughout Europe and throughout civilizations, whether it be in India, China, or other parts of the ancient world. And in doing so, you can see that through democratization and having a representative system, you are channeling that energy to create conflict. But in doing so, that conflict and that push for hegemony is then created in a way to create governing coalitions, and in doing so is bloodless. So if we're looking at this as the way that was described by Armand, on balance, we can see that through the reduction of violence and the reduction of human loss of life, definitely swings things over towards democracy. But secondly, we also need to look at how it extends legitimacy to the ruling regime. Whether it's deliberative, direct, or indirect democracy through such as a representative democracy, it is to ensure that our polity has a method of voicing concerns. Regardless of the stratification of our society, democracy, especially when it's a representative democracy, has a mechanism for the divisions and inequalities of our society to be voiced and addressed. Even the founders of our constitutional republic in the United States have recognized that the majority of the masses, while may not be what we would call the elite or the aristocratic landed gentry, they would still have a way to have their opinions concerned and voiced through America's House of Representatives. We've seen this in various forms of ancient democracy and now today in modern bicameral institutions across the globe. It allows these concerns to be heard. Even if you believe in natural hierarchy or address the needs that people are unequal, having a mechanism for those people who are envious or to have, their own inequalities addressed serves as motivation for competition and allows the regime to address that. So when you had Joel talking about that dad telling the two kids in the back seat, hey, cut it out, you have a mechanism for those two kids to cut it out and have their stuff heard by their parents. But then third, finally, is that any sort of large-scale political system with a large mass of a population, whether it be voters or citizens, these nations or empires need some sort of fractal or diffused mechanisms for power to be governed. And in doing so, that's through a direct or an elected democracy with representatives. This allows you to address their needs, and this allows you to address the issues of those concerns of the people, and allows the various regions, whether they be farmers or more of our urban-rural divide that we see now in many Western democracies, be addressed in doing so. Through that, democracy allows these avenues to be addressed. But in doing so, let's extend now on to what Armand was talking about. So let's talk about how the fact that the voters don't know what they're talking about. Well, one, when we talk about the voters not knowing what they're talking about, or they're focused on their day-to-day needs, well, regardless of the opportunity cost, what keeps people more concerned is the issue of whether or not participating in the system is worth it, which means keeping their immediate needs happy. We can take a look at the concern of the democratization through game theory, through the famous 2012 book, Why Nations Fail, from James Robison and Darren Acemoglu, saying that essentially those who are concerned about their individual needs or don't know anything essentially have to game it out between those who actually do. So those who are in charge, whether it's the representatives or the elites, democratization, it usually is the bottomed out option if they feel it's better than revolution. And that's why, even though they may not know what's currently going on or what their foreign policy of their government is, or may not even know their exact policy position, they do know that they have an avenue and a system in place that beats the alternative, which is, usually some sort of violent revolution, which in turn refers back to my first point on harm reduction. But when we talk about the other concerns about long-term problems in democracy, the things that he very much addressed about, pensions, infrastructure, climate change, those are all being addressed right now in our current political system, which is a direct or representative democracy. We have climate change, infrastructure, and pensions and debt always constantly being referenced in our government. And the reason why is that our short-term concerns are immediately supplanted by the sympathies about the long-term aspect of our grandchildren and our immediate, people around us and our families. Those sympathies are pitted against our own short-term interests, and in turn that creates a long-term solution by balancing out the competition of the immediate long needs of voting with our wallets with the long-term issues that those things provide. Yes, politics does have the problem of having us, I don't know when I'm going to be in power again, so I might as well seize it all up now. But eventually, those very concerns of seizing up power now comes back to bite them. So it encourages more long-term thinking in the long run. So if we look at this thing on balance, we can see that the reduction of violence, extending legitimacy to our regime, and creating more effective fractal governance allows us to easily bypass the concerns that people don't know what they're talking about. They obviously form coalitions, they vote with their wallets, and they focus on the long term by competing against envy with that of their progeny. And for those reasons, we can see that the only option to vote for here is democracy.
But let me ask you then, how does democracy guard one thing? You mentioned that democracy decentralizes, or rather limits, power, but demonstrably democracy only serves to concentrate material power into the hands of an sort of, what would you say, oligarchy by another name. Because what would you say to the critique that democracy doesn't pose any sort of natural immune system to the influencing of opinions and the voting patterns of people by other means besides just a sort of decentralized education network or media? What would you say to democracy having no natural immune system to any sort of encroaching of its citizenry, or sort of a predatory network that is influencing various apparatuses of power that doesn't really need to rely on government power to come in and sort things out? What would you say to that? Like, what happens if corporations all decide to collude together and do certain actions against corporations? Corporations, man. What about how does democracy limit corporations, man?
I also want to make sure Armand gets in on this as well. Armand, would you add anything to what Gio said as far as criticizing what the Prudentialist was talking about?
Well, I didn't know. My sister, I was writing my rebuttal.
Oh, okay. Well, then, Prudentialists go for it, yes, and then Armand goes for your rebuttal. I didn't know we were writing things down. This is a first for me, but I guess...
That's what I was doing. I was writing down his arguments and responding.
Perfect. No, this is... You guys are the first actual professional people to do this. No offense, Joel.
I don't write nothing down. I could keep it short and sweet, if you know that Sopranos reference. But
yes.
That was the Christopher intervention where... Never mind. Don't
Yes.
That's
Oh, I got it.
anti-Italian
You're good.
discrimination.
You're weak. You're out of control. And no judgment, Paulie. No judgment. Don't worry.
Okay.
And also one last thing. I uploaded a new poll because somebody wrote pretty correctly, Lev, why do you always upload the polls before the speakers even get to speak
For example,
yet?
I have an example. Okay, so Prudentialist. What if Joel orders his Patagonia jacket and the corporations decide to totally fuck over people who are ordering this particular type of jacket? They've marked them as, I don't know, dissidents or somehow. And so they totally just like price fix and gouge and destroy and outprice Joel's ability to buy this Patagonia jacket. What are you going to do?
Dude.
Yeah. What's going to happen? Well,
how do we destagnate?
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, I mean, how can you prevent democracy from totally stagnating? How can democracy become destagnant? How can it guard itself against various forces of decay and oligarchy?
What is that? I saw that in the chat a lot. Like people try. Somebody said I'm stagnating. I was like, I don't know what that means.
Don't worry, ignore the chat, please.
We're just memeing, bro. Just you have to be there.
Oh boy.
All right.
So on the question of stagnation and how do we prevent that sort of aspect of oligarchy, the question becomes, and that's like the almighty question, right? About how does democracy
since Plato's
defend
days,
itself?
literally.
Yeah, so that's been the question, right? And of how do we handle the either outside forces or non-state actors interfering with democracy, and how essentially you're taking away the sovereignty of the state, or at least what we consider that traditional. In the way in which history has sort of told us, the way that you sort of make sure that you limit oligarchies' influence on that, and I'm arguing from the pro-democracy side here, is that one, the awareness of that fact, it becomes essential. If you're aware that Patagonia company is price fixing and screwing over the ability to either buy his jacket, or that Patagonia company has sort of its own line of Pinkertons that are screwing over people that want to buy Patagonia jackets, that's what the point of making aware of the system towards democracy is. It's the immune system comes from its participation. In the same way that you'll see, the marketplace work with, in taking a look from a sort of Adam Smith lens of the marketplace, it is a self-correcting system. The things that we identify as flaws means that those issues need to be redressed within the polity, and by in essence, the state needs to assert its sovereignty over that, institution.
This chat is based on a red pill.
There we go. So Armand, now it's time for your response.
Oh, my view changed for a second and I thought I lost folks, but sure. Yeah, the chat is very based. Oh my God.
Based on what, right?
Who knows?
On what?
Based on what? It's not based on. Come on, Zoomer lingo, right? Anyway.
That's the best meme.
I know. Okay. So first, let's talk about the arguments that the Prudentialists presented. It's so weird for me to be addressing a black and white. I don't remember. What is that? John Locke?
It is Edmund Burke.
Edmund Burke. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. Okay. Well, ironic given the position you're arguing, I guess. But all right. So first of all, let's talk about this issue of harm and violence reduction. It's just it's flatly not true. First of all, so scholars have actually found that democracies are more likely to initiate wars and in conflicts with other countries because politicians who are democratically elected have a lot of pressure to perform, basically. And so Gilberto and Chrisman Cox did a study of 125 different countries between 93 and 2007. And what they found is that in democracies, politicians face public pressure to fight the enemies of the state and initiate a war and a conflict. Autocrats, because they have the discretion to make decisions based on what is in their self-interest and therefore the power of their country's self-interest, they're more likely to back down from those conflicts because they can make a decision absent public pressure. So you're actually going to have more wars because of democracy. The second thing is actually when you're switching, you talk about regime change and democratic transition. But ignore the examples I had of China. Specifically, China and modern autocracies have established sort of like technocratic procedures for which people can transition power peacefully. Xi Jinping transitioned power peacefully from Hu Jintao, who transitioned power peacefully from, I don't recall the previous name, but like they've gotten a lot smarter. And so autocracies have learned it's not in their self-interest to have a giant war every single time. And the successful ones, like in Singapore, have procedures and policies that aren't full democracy, but also allow you to do it, transition power without having a war every time. So second, they're talking about method of voicing concerns. Like, I don't care if people well, a couple of things. Like, one, that's not what should matter, right? Like, if people feel heard or not heard, who cares? What matters is whether the government is performing to make the most good for the most people. But second, people have no idea what's going on, so they don't even know if their voices are heard, right? Like a quarter of them don't know who their senator is. Half of them can't even tell you like who the current. Actually, there's an interesting poll like for the first 2 months or so of the after the election. There was a large portion of people who thought that Joe Biden was already president because they didn't understand how inaugurations worked, and were so the whole mess and confusion about that. Like people don't have the ability to even know if their voices are heard because like it doesn't make sense for them to invest that much time and resources when the decision they can make is a very small impact, right? And then finally, we talked about like, oh, well, we need some way to make sure that people's voices are heard. But polling is notoriously like super unreliable. You can shape polls to distort people however they, what they think or believe. And when people actually vote at the poll, like different polls, when they actually vote for politicians, oftentimes like we find that they don't even know what they're voting for. They don't know what their politicians' policies connect to. Like something, I think it was like a quarter of Donald Trump voters in the last election cycle flipped. I thought that he was for single-payer healthcare. There are folks who supported Biden because they thought he was like more pro-gun rights. Like the connection between what voters think and what they're actually voting for, super loose and not tied. So there's no representation here. Let's talk about my arguments then, going back to my original arguments. So the first thing is this idea of, I guess it really ties to concern about individuals knowing that they have agency and avenue. I think that really applies to the whole argument about like method of voicing concern. Like individuals don't really know what concerns they are voicing. And secondly, they're not making good decisions for the best outcomes for them, right? Like preserving their life, preserving their health, preserving their long-term prosperity. And so I think you can just really cross-apply the arguments in the previous case there. And then finally, talking about this idea of like, oh, long-term concerns are being addressed. Like, no, they're not. Sorry, it just frustrates. So first of all, like, there are 4 trillion unfunded liabilities in the United States today, right? Like these pensions, yeah, people talk about them a lot, but the reason they talk about them is because they don't get addressed, right? It's just a thing. That's the whole fundamental problem of democracy. If you were in Singapore or China, they just say that we'll do it, right? Like we'll raise the taxes, we'll cut the fees, we'll cut the pensions, we'll solve the problem. Second, climate change is not being solved. Like the International Panel on IPCC specifically said that we're currently on the path with nothing changing to 3 to 4 degrees Celsius, which for context is really bad. 6 degrees would make us equivalent to, it would make the planet essentially uninhabitable, right? Like we're closer to the path on that. And because democratic regimes can't like get their shit together on commitments, they're screwing up the ability to have long-term priorities. And actually autocratic regimes are some of the ones that have made the fastest transitions to clean energy. So while China, for example, is still like a huge emitter of CO2, like they flipped really dramatically, much faster than the United States, which has been very slow to change sort of its investment in renewable energy and all that stuff. And on infrastructure, like I had an example earlier, right? Like India and China, compare them side by side. India hasn't invested in this infrastructure. China has. Compare that Singapore compared to the United States, like technocratic regimes invest in long-term problems, democratic ones don't. So I think for all those reasons, vote no on democracy.
Can I jump in here quickly? Because I
Sure.
still remember the first point that you made, which was basically saying that a study that like on basically democracies are more likely to go to war.
Yeah.
And then the time period was between like 93 and 2007. So you
That's
picked
right.
the time period where America kept going to war and then kind of like pressuring all the world's democracies, which are only democracies because America was the global hegemon, and they had to be democracies, otherwise America would invade them and make them democracies. They had to pressure them all to like send a certain amount of troops to grant legitimacy to particularly like the Iraq War is like the most obvious example of this. So I mean, I think it's like pretty like you're just picking a really convenient sample at a very convenient time period when clearly the United States didn't go to war because of popular sentiment. The United States went to war because of geopolitical reasons, and then popular sentiment is just manufactured. I think this is actually like a better argument for why democracy is retarded, is that there is no will of the people that can actually be epistemically discovered through the democratic system, because like the actual like political discourse itself through which the kind of participants in democracy actually understand their own positions and understand their own kind of like political consciousness is manufactured by like basically an elite, which is like a kind of a subsection of intellectuals, the media, set of think tanks, foundations, basically just a set of organizations that like design all of the political beliefs, opinions, news, etc. And if you trace them in the United States or any other like modern democratic society, they basically all these institutions are kind of funded by a wealthy elite of bankers, other kind of financial interest, and are deeply connected to every country's like intelligence apparatus. So really like popular sentiment is just like a manufactured product of an elite that governs. So there is no actual real thing, democracy. It doesn't actually exist. It's just like a really good illusion that an autocracy can create around itself. So yeah, I think that's something.
I would still say, though, that there are tension points that can be maneuvered by certain people, like Trotsky did back in the day when it came to the dissatisfaction that Russians were facing under the Tsar. Like a lot of these priests that they had there, the Orthodox priests, the Russian people themselves, like even the serfs, they were getting pretty tired of these people bossing them around all the time. And at a certain point, if something snaps, then people do kind of, put themselves in the right position to make the most of it. But I do see there being these natural reactions that occur too. Like one of the incidents that created the first Russian Revolution in 1917, that was a pretty random one, I'd say, when it came to one soldier fired a shot at an innocent, and that was the straw that broke the camel's back there. So again, this isn't something that was orchestrated by the elite. This was just something that, was a brewing sentiment that then, sure, you could say Germany partly financed it, and Lenin and Trotsky got in there to do what they did. But still, there were sentiments there that people were feeling that had to have some kind of a reaction, regardless of whoever else was doing.
I think
but
that
this doesn't
also
mean... Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that this is what Noam Chomsky talks about in his book Manufacturing Consent, where this is basically, I mean, we all remember, well, I don't know how old everybody is, but remember Occupy Wall Street. Everybody was sitting there out in front of the big banks and stuff like that. And now you have almost that same group of people, at BLM protests or whatever, sponsored by Goldman Sachs. So it's like, no, this stuff does, there is a natural reaction, like what Lev's saying, but there is an elite that does sort of figure out a way to harness this and introduces some sort of new outrage and then redirects this into whatever they want. I mean, this is, you can go just through the list of everybody who is currently sponsoring the current outrage, which is just mega corporation after mega corporation, which was being protested, at the beginning of the last decade. And now they're basically pushing these protests themselves to their own ends.
I would also add that like being outraged isn't making a decision. Like being outraged is just the idea that, we need to have some kind of new solution. There's a problem. So maybe a lot of the political problems that exist are real problems. And obviously like part of like manufacturing the public will is like literally manipulating the actual feelings and impulses and like the actual situation of the people, in a society, because obviously, if you're a skilled propagandist, like you have to kind of hack the emotions of the normie to get them to care about whatever your proposed solution is. But generally the proposed solution has nothing to do with popular sentiment and is entirely manufactured by a kind of epistemic technocratic elite. The example of like global warming, that Armand put forward. I mean, the idea like global warming is, I mean, in my opinion, it's bullshit, but it's clear that like the whole discourse around it is manufactured by an elite. You have one side of the debate funded by, fossil fuel companies. You have the other side of the debate that's kind of supported by like the UN and all these other massive international institutions, and they're engaged in a kind of battle with the average person on the street. Like either they just get their propaganda from one side or the other side, but they don't actually know what the fuck's going on. Like, the whole like believe science crowd, they don't know the first thing about climate science, so there is no like popular sentiment that has any kind of epistemic definition, has any intelligibility. Popular sentiment is just raw emotion. People are pissed off, but it doesn't actually direct itself to political decision making without like coercion.
So before we get to the rebuttal, I want to ask Armand, do you agree with what Joel was talking about? And this isn't even like in the debate agree, but just like in general, were there any things, I know this is kind of partly taking the mask off, but I am curious as far as manufacturing consent and all of that stuff. Do you agree with the points that were brought up? And if not, where do you disagree?
Well, I think it's less. I agree with the general premise. I just think I'm a little more cynical about how calculated it is. The truth is that like public opinion, the vast majority of people don't think about politics most of the time. So if somebody calls them up and says, "What do you think about X?" They're making an impulse decision based off of that moment. And it could be, if you phrase the question this way, suddenly, like abortion is a good example of like you can get whatever opinion you want on abortion based on the examples you use and like the way you phrase the question. So simultaneously, there are Republicans citing polls saying Americans think abortion should only be like this very limited instance, and then Democrats saying the opposite. And both of them represent like real honest data. It's just that like average person isn't going around sitting down thinking, what is my exact calculated position on abortion? It just, they'll answer the pollster and tell them. Even like actually, this is a good way that Donald Trump was like a good representation of like the American id, because like if you sat down or like, what does he believe in his heart of hearts? It's a bag of cats like in his brain, right? Like it's just like maybe this time he believes this and this time this, and it's an impulse. And so I think people attempt to manufacture consent and they create narratives and they fight over it. But I also think that even the epistemic idea of like the American people believe X precisely is an illusion.
Wait, what was an illusion? That Americans
the American people, like you can definitively say the American people believe X, Y, and Z, like as a fact. I think that's an illusion.
Would you agree with, I think the consensus here is that certain things have been established as a kind of orthodoxy in, let's say, red areas and orthodoxy in blue areas. And it's very hard to get people to think differently just because this was the environment they were raised in.
Well, it's not just hard. It goes back to actually the argument I was making earlier about social incentives. Like the average, let's say you live in like a really conservative area and everyone you know is like very pro-life and very religious. And let's say you or for climate change, everybody thinks climate change is BS. If you sat down and just spent like a year of your life researching and looking at the data and science, so like maybe you could be convinced that climate change is real. But like, why would you, right? Like you're going to be ostracized by your friends, your peers, everyone you know. You're going to like stand out as a weird one. Like you're not going to get along. You personally changing your opinion on it is not going to affect any outcome in the world, right? Like your opinions tend to be more about like fitting in with the people you're around than they are about like trying to discover truth, which is, why I think, I guess it's confusing here. Like,
no, this isn't confusing at all.
Debate, but in the frame of this debate, if I was making that argument, I'd say that's an argument for technocracy because experts have a real incentive to figure out the truth because they are responsible for, like, it is their job, and like therefore, like that's why like Chinese leaders, for example, like try to promote economic growth because the economy doesn't do well, but like they get executed. And so, but even in my like democracy head, like my real personal opinions, it's why I think like these narratives are a lot more about people's These narratives are a lot more about like social tribes and social signaling, which is why when you want to do persuasion, it's less about sitting there and arguing at people like believe the science or here's a million studies, and more about trying to figure out like talking about their beliefs, their context. So for like environmentalism, when you talk to conservatives in principles of like preserving, God's stewardship of Earth and the heritage of our culture and community and clean air, it's a lot more persuasive than dumping a lot of statistics and saying like you need to care about endangered species.
But even this idea of believing the science, like it presumes that science, like institutional science, is a sincere epistemic process. But like for the same reasons why democracy isn't a sincere epistemic process, neither is science in most cases. Like the people who actually pay for, like you said, like it's their job to be experts on a particular, whatever particular domain, it's their job to be climate scientists, whatever. But who actually like gives them research grants? Like where does their money come from? If they were to hold a counterposition to like whatever the hegemonic paradigm in their particular field was, would they lose their job? Would they still get paid? And the reality is that in most sciences, no, you have to kind of agree with the hegemonic paradigm in whatever science it is. And there is very little toleration for alternative views within the institutional matrix. And so in my opinion, like most science is bullshit for the same reason that like, even if you were to get it to hold a democratic vote and decide upon like hold referendums on various issues of the day, like for the same reason, like I don't even believe that there is like a process that you could produce in a kind of like in a perfectly like neutral scenario where you could get to this, because everybody ultimately when it comes to politics is kind of always kind of rationalizing their intuitions. So like on the abortion issue, it has nothing to do with science, whether you analyze the science on abortion or whatever. It's whether you think it's right or wrong. It's like a moral issue, and morality, like these kinds of moral valuations are not products of rational belief, but they're pre-rational intuitions.
Well, that's an interesting point about warranted true belief. In other words, I think like what's interesting, what Armand is doing is sort of like an interesting approach to anti-democracy in terms of like a pure like technocratic rule, a pure secular technocratic rule, whereas before, I would say the past 100 years, the conception of regimes that were anti-democratic were very much aligned with different epistemic and even metaphysical frameworks that didn't really consider the rule of the mass as a legitimate form in terms of like imperium, right? Imperium imperio, like the state within the state, the empire within the empire, in terms of legitimate authority emanating. But it's pretty interesting because you're going back to China as the best example nowadays, which is valid, right? But I just think it's very interesting that this is going from one form of pro-democracy to a form of anti-democracy that is ostensibly born out of the original conception of like post-enlightenment secular democracy to begin with. Now it's like just take the mask off, and now we're going to have the rule by experts that Jeff Bezos has hired or whoever, or Bill Gates has given grant money to. So it's pretty interesting. And so, Prudentialist, what would you say? Don't you think that the technocracy is going to win in the end, and that the people are going to be crushed like the bug people they are, the small-souled bug men that they are? So what's going to happen?
Every time I come on here, you guys talk about bug people.
Oh, I know it's a 2015 meme, but it's yeah. Prudentialist.
So are we taking the mask off?
Not yet. Or? We still have.
No, we still got a few 20
we
minutes.
Still got 10 minutes because it's 5:48. So technically speaking, around 10 minutes, and then we could take the mask off for real.
Then the Judas cradle will be lifted. So.
Oh, well, that's why I was just asking, because I know that we were addressing it earlier. So in regards to the technocracy aspect, I mean, the technocracy arguments that I'm hearing, because we keep going back to China, right? There's numerous issues that we can take. Yeah, China. Yeah. There's so many issues that we can address there. One, while there are issues about unfunded pensions, the thing with the Chinese technocracy is that it's so focused on economic growth, it doesn't even really consider the money suck that is sort of pensions and liabilities. You have a population almost equivalent to the entire population of the United States, so roughly 300 million people or so, that are over the age of 65 that don't really have the equivalent of a social security safety net that we have here in the United States. And that's within China. Not to mention that if we're going to talk about climate change and how China's doing so great on that issue and thinking about long term, 58% of their energy is still reliant on coal. Most of the things that come out of the Paris Climate Accords, for example, are mainly being pushed by democratic states. China is still one of the world's largest polluters, and the United States' carbon footprint is equal to its levels in 1992. This is a 27-year low. Like we're doing a lot better, arguably, under our system than we are compared to our great geopolitical rival in the Orient. So if we're going to make arguments on technocracy, sure, it's great to rule by experts, but if you're going to refer back to what Gio is talking about, the empire within the empire, that whatever the ruling hegemony is inside that state is going to be mandating it to maintain its sovereignty and to maintain its control. You're not looking at the long term, you're looking to make sure you're not getting executed. So the exact same criticism that comes out of democracy in regards to immediate short-term interests is coming the same thing out of those technocrats. They're not thinking about the good of the state. They're not thinking about the good of the population. They're making sure that they don't get themselves sent to a prison camp where their organs will be forcibly sold to party elites for 10,000 yuan. That's where we're at. In regards to the other aspects of things like conflict and whatnot, yeah, Joel made a very good point. It's a very cherry-picked study of American, adventurism and around the world, and that ignores like the last, 4,500 years of human history prior to the Enlightenment of liberal democracy, where kings and other aspects went to war. Just look at, the first through fifth crusades about the Arab Caliphate versus Christendom and the European kings that were in there. Not very many democratic states involved. If we're going to be taking a look at who's killed more people, I think we can definitely see other forms of anti-democracy have been killing people for a lot more and a lot longer than democracy has. Not to mention that despite all of that, we are relatively living in the most peaceful time in human history when more countries on earth are more democratic than they have ever been in the history of human governance. And it proves that point extensively, at least for the pro-democracy side. When we're taking a look at the aspects of the legitimacy of the regime, again, you have to refer back to Why Nations Fail from Moglu and Robinson. When the ruling elite are not doing their job and keeping both themselves and the functions of the government working, the sovereignty working, making sure that the, Jeff Bezos of the world are doing their jobs, people are eventually going to have to game it out as to whether or not violent revolution is the better alternative or to just suck it up and live through the system. For right now, things are still relatively okay, but if the moment that things start getting too far, whether bread line or, food distribution centers get ruined, chains of supplies get ruined, things are going to get bloody. So you have the responsibility of the sovereign, which is the government, to take action. And right now, through our representative democracy, that's the way that it functions. Now, the way that you sort of correct that issue, I think, ironically enough, is making it more indirect democracy, but that's a conversation for a later time. But overall, we can see that democracy itself, while flawed, is still proven to be more effective, at least in the means of keeping that balance between sort of that managerial, 20% Pareto principle and the masses in check.
But about the text you keep referring to, I also have that book, Why Nations Fail.
Yeah.
Another point would be that the sort of perverse incentive structures that crop up in a lot of these failed nations, how would democracy, and this has been a while since I've read the book, but like how would democracy ensure that there are proper incentives? For example, would you not want a democracy to be, but again, I guess this goes to the purpose of what a democracy or any nation is for in terms of the health and the well-being of its people. But what defines that people? Say, for instance, you have a situation where in American democracy, for instance, there's incredible political balkanization. There's no cooperation, even between the genders, for instance. People aren't incentivized anymore to have sort of families or productive relationships between each other, even on the most basic of levels. And so you see all of this rot and decay everywhere. And so how would a democracy, like instead of like full blown, like, let's go back to imperium, let's have, divine right of kings, apart from like a full blown sort of like, I don't know, Adrian Vermeule, Catholic integralist, Castizo futurist imperium. Apart from that, how would you say people should choose to be productive citizens and create the conditions of optimal family structures when you could just, I don't know, pay Ayala on OnlyFans to do that for you? Like how does democracy inspire greatness in the hearts of its own citizenry, in other words? I know that's like a very fucking tall order for a few minutes that we have left of this first debate, but
no, I'll give it my best shot.
And then Armand, I would love to hear the last point from him as well. But go for it, Prudentialist.
Yeah, let's go answer this incredibly loaded question. So like the heart of the question that you're getting at, right, is like how does democracy solve the issue of sort of cultural decay? Mm-hmm. And so the first thing that becomes upon that is that democracy, at least how it functions here in the United States, was originally formatted to be indirect and incredibly local. And to do so, the localization of our democracy must be reinvigorated, which means less and less attention needs to be focused on Washington, and more attention needs to be focused on your state capital and your county. So for me, it would be like Austin, Texas, right? That's where my state legislature is. More attention needs to be realized that despite the fact that we put all these billions of dollars into the system in Washington, a majority of the things that affect your day-to-day are locally. And so that means, like people had said, you need to realize this and become aware of it and take better use of your time. To correct that issue, you must become a paragon of virtue yourself and participate in the system and not find yourself atomized and alone, and to let people who are not interested simply take their options and take their interests and speak on your behalf, even though whatever they may say may not be in your interest. This means participating in your local city council meetings. This means running for the local dog catcher. This means writing your state representative. Yes, those things take time, and even though the anti-democracy side says, well, by doing all that, it's not worthwhile, but that's incorrect, because by the time that you make these people aware, the 40% of Americans that don't participate in democracy would fundamentally make it better if they actually got off their ass and did something. But instead, we've gotten to a point where we have consigned ourselves and resigned ourselves to think, well, this is as good as it gets, this is where we are at, and this is simply how it's going to be. But if you were to actually engage within the system and find that A, it's incredibly accessible, and B, that there are plenty of ways to actually organize and initiate and affect change, then you would find a way to correct that problem.
Armand, what say you?
Well, we have 3 minutes left, and I have to run actually because I have a work meeting at 3. So.
Oh no! I wanted you to stick around for the unmasking for just a little bit. I don't know.
Sorry,
would it be
yeah.
Rip the mask off then. Fuck it. Rip the mask off.
Okay. Would it be possible for rip the mask off right now? Let's just go right into it. I would love for you to just stick around just for a wee bit with the mask off.
Sure, mask off. What am I supposed to do?
Okay, so now that you have
on democracy, bruh.
Yeah, now that you have the mask off, just let us know in general, like what your real thought. Yeah,
Sure.
Tell us what you really think.
I think actually what Prudentialist was saying was like at the end, like really encouraged me. It's like, yeah, like through this whatever system you have, none of it's going to work unless you don't get involved and try to change it and have an effect on it. And the ways that I found the most impact is actually through local involvement, like local party committees, local elections, things like that. You could make a huge difference. And broadly speaking, like in terms of the arguments, I think the long-term, the biggest problem with really autocracy versus democracy and things that Prudentialist hinted at was that it's very hard to figure out who's in charge, right? Like the arguments for technocracy that I made were all about like, well, like if you had really smart, good people in charge, like they'd make good, smart decisions, but like who's smart, good people, right? Like Joel and I like have clearly very fundamentally different views of the world. I probably think some of you as an expert is very different from who he thinks is an expert. And I think democracy right now is an imperfect but the best system we have to sort of try to get to that. I also think just quickly, like the nihilism of, well, we can't know anything. Everything's corrupt and biased. Like, I don't know, man, like we're on a Zoom call that was developed by scientists who like had to figure that shit out eventually. Like there are some ways to test things against reality. Like there are value questions like abortion, which tend to be just like, what do you believe about the world? But there are also just like empirical ones. And
No, I agree there, but do you
if
think
Zoom
that maybe
held like a democratic election,
Well-
how should we build this computer program,
Voting
guys?
by Zoom.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
it would have failed. I mean, I think the company Zoom is an autocracy. It has a CEO who tells everyone what to do. And then
No,
they
I'm
employ
not-
engineers, much like that's the way our society actually works. is
Yeah,
people
I'm
in
not
charge who
arguing
employ
for
social
that.
engineers.
Maybe we
I
need
think if anything-
neo-cameralism.
What I'm saying is, those were like two separate points. I was just saying, like, so that would be so nihilistic to believe that there's no science and no facts, because we can obviously like test some things against reality. In terms of what I believe in democracy, I think, like Churchill said, democracy is a bad system, but the least bad of the ones we have, because how we it's very, very hard to set up a system that chooses like the right people to be in charge. And like even in China, for example, like they had this whole thing like, we'll be an oligarchy in the party, and then you have a transition and so on. And then Xi Jinping just changed it and is like, well, actually, fuck it, I'm not transitioning and I'm in charge forever. And who knows what's going to happen there.
True. Well, I know you have a
alright.
limited time.
Yeah.
I just wanted to quickly have the Prudentialist, since he was your opponent here, say something real quick just for how he thought you did or anything related to that before you go.
I thought you did fine. Like, you did good. I mean, obviously you had a lot more prep than I did. I got invited like the day before. So this was all sort of just scribbled down. I have a formal speech and debate experience while in high school,
cool.
and I did it collegiately. So you did really well with your research. You did really well on your follow through and flow. So you and I may disagree on things in real life, but the fact that you engage locally, you participate in the system, I have a ton of respect for that. So it was nice to chat with you.
Thank you. Likewise. I have a debate background too. So,
Oh, wonderful.
yeah, so cool.
There we go.
All right.
Excellent.
Thanks,
I have a
everybody.
debate-
Thank you, Armand. Follow
Thank
Armand
you.
on Twitter. Here is the link to Armand's Twitter. So thank you so much,
I have
Armand,
a
for being
debate
here.
background too. I would just like
Yeah.
basically argue with my teachers in high school.
By the way,
Believe me for that.
Prudentialist, that was kind of a humble brag, though, in a way, when you said, like, you did this whole thing and it only took me, But anyway, I'm not going to get into that right now. But
Oh,
either
I
way,
wasn't trying to humble brag it at
I
all.
know.
I was like,
You lifted in
I
the
have to.
library, bro.
I was like, oh shit, like I have to like find all these arguments and play devil's advocate for a position I'm usually critical of, and I'm like, well, shit.
No, you
Klaus
did. You did.
Schwab,
You.
Rockefeller.
Oh,
You know what's crazy? You mentioned Klaus Schwab today. I think is he actually? Who's the guy on Twitter? The Rothschild. Is he actually a Rothschild member? David Rothschild.
Yeah, of course he is.
Yeah.
Okay. He said today that the only vote against this bill, Prudentialist, you probably know about this anti-Asian thing, Bill. It was the only one that voted against it was Josh Hawley, right? Because he's got to be based. So he David Rothschild said that the real intention is that Josh Hawley just wants to end the republic, and I screen capped. I'm going to tweet out something like, it takes one to know one about ending republics, right? The Rothschilds, but
They would
Just
know.
say,
Wait,
I mean,
wait,
I
wait.
wish.
I've been under a rock. What is this bill you're talking about? For those who are uninformed like me.
yeah, I've just heard about this today. Something about anti-Asian hate. It's one of these symbolic boilerplate. Like, there's so much. Like, we're literally. It's like in World War II when we fucking put them in camps. Like it's happening every day right now. But
so
but
if
don't
a
mention
black-
who does it though. No, don't mention. But no,
The
but
black
seriously,
person
what is?
abuses an Asian person. Now the white supremacist American government can put them in jail.
Well,
so.
you see, structural racism made them. Anyways, Prudentialist, what is this bill about?
So let me pull up an article for you there on that, and I can give everybody. So apparently, it was a bill targeting Asian hate crimes against Asian Americans, and it passed the Senate with bipartisan support, except for Josh Hawley.
I thought Asians were white people now. I don't understand.
Wait, so what would
Oh,
this
wait,
bill
people
do
know.
necessarily? What
The
is
way
it
to like
supposed
draft the Asian vote into the Democrats by
Well, this is
encouraging
No,
them to
it
say
does.
yes, you will be included in our like BS dialogue around
that's-
people
no,
of
that
color.
I get,
that
but
is
what
the
is the
exact
actual-
reason.
But what is the actual practical things that are written in the bill that it's supposed to do?
Yeah.
Because
Who
that is
cares?
that is the implied. Sure, who cares? I care because I'm just curious what exactly they wrote down. What
Lev just wants to
exactly
figure
is
out how
supposed
to like loophole like racially abuse. Like how do I commit a hate crime against
They're
an
gonna have
Asian
the
and get away
blood-
with it?
like,
I gotta
They're
game
gonna have
this.
the Hajno line, but only with like Asia. So if you're like Chinese or Japanese, no way. But if you're like some other like browner version of Asian, then you'll do. Sorry, Prudentialist, we keep cutting you off. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
you're good. You're absolutely fine. I'm pulling up the measure itself. So Let's take a look.
How do they
In
determine
Canada,
whether
we have
racism was
every-
the reason why you like? What if you just beat up an Asian guy just because, like, for totally non-racist reasons? Like, how do you?
Well, that was like the Matthew Shepard case. It was really people say that it was the drug deal that went bad. It wasn't that he was gay. But then
I did a poster for the Laramie Project, by the way, which is hanging in my because I was in Lee Strasberg Theater Institute, and there was this play, the Laramie Project. I wasn't in it, but I did the poster for it. It's hanging in my hallway. Wait till you see this thing. I'm gonna bring it up, but after I hear the Prudentialist.
Yeah.
So apparently, no later than 7 days after the date of enactment of this act, the Attorney General shall designate an officer or employee of the Department of Justice whose responsibility is to essentially talk about, hate crimes and reporting them to federal and local agencies. It's a lot of boilerplate in regards to, hate crimes and the DOJ taking advantage of it. And then they have a Jabara Hire No Hate Act. Oh boy, the Khalid Jabara and Heather Hire National Opposition to Hate, Threats, and Equality Act of 2021.
Wow.
Oh boy. It's talking about United States Hate Crime Statistics Act and from 1990. And it's supposed to apparently expand it to include eradication of bias-motivated violence, to include anti-Asian hate crimes. There's a lot of reference to COVID-19 in here.
But how do you eradicate it? What's the step-by-step process here?
Well, it's a 21-page bill. Give me a second.
In Canada, we have these all the time.
I've got a new bill proposal.
Okay.
All bills must have a too long didn't read addenda. So
I wholeheartedly agree. Give me a TLDR for Congress.
That was like the what was the report that one journalist wrote, like an erotic short fiction about the FBI Trump Comey.
This is a good point that should have been brought up in the debate, actually, that like ultimately, remember when like Rand Paul put like a read the bill act.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, and
Congress,
nobody wanted to do it because it would have taken.
Yeah. They voted against it. Now they voted against reading the things that they vote on. So like, if they don't read it, let alone write it, who's writing it and deciding?
Well, I mean,
that's
the problem.
Lawyers that work for like some foundation or.
You know
like
what Nancy Pelosi said to the Rand Paul on the floor of the House when that came up? This was like 2016 or so. Before. She said, the healthcare bill, we will read it when we pass.
No. What she
you
said.
You have to pass the law and find out what's in it.
Exactly. That's what it was.
All right, look at this. This is the Laramie Project poster that I created for Lee Strasberg Theater Institute.
Oh, wow.
Oh boy.
Wow.
What do you think of that, huh?
That kind of reminds me of Issues, the corn cover for Issues.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
He's going.
You can't see the
green screen here.
the fucking green screen.
It's like some weird. It has literally nothing to do with the Laramie Project whatsoever.
Louise Kaufman.
It's just a doll, like a creepy little zombie doll with a helicopter that's like attached to the spike on it, and there's a church below. I guess that has something to do with the Laramie Project. And there's like this river that's coming out of his leg over here.
The Laramie Project
hollow leg. So there we go. That's what that looks like.
Essentially, the law, from how I'm skimming through here, is that it is essentially the DOJ is going to give grant money under the Hate Crime Statistics Act to, the FBI and then state and local law enforcement agencies to have more qualitative and quantitative analysis of hate crimes, the number of hate crimes reported and who does them, and how much money the states will give it, and essentially that, and having specialized units in the FBI, DOJ, and state and local agencies of collecting and reporting hate crime data. It will do nothing.
Tell me, Prudentialist, when I was a kid, I used to call one Chinese restaurant and make a really, really long order, and then call another Chinese restaurant and get my friend to make a really long order, and then I would say, "Can you repeat that?" and then put the phones together. Would this be considered a hate crime, would you say, under this legislation?
Those videos are on YouTube as well. They're pretty funny, like the ones where they just have the two Chinese people talking back to each other.
The best was back in the heyday of YouTube prank calling. They had the irate black man guy, and it was always the picture of Ving Rhames. They had the soundboard from Realms of Darkness, and they would play the soundboard to the original irate black man. And so he was like talking to himself. Then halfway through the call, he realized it was himself. So, but no, you Americans are lucky. In Canada, we have all sorts of these boilerplate bullshit laws every time something happens. I mean, just the other day, someone DM'd me this court case where these two friends posted A Wyatt Man memes around their campus, and now they're going to face jail time for hate crimes. Because
wait, is this Canada?
Yes. This is, well, in Canada we have much more tooth because we had the Human Rights Commission's bullshit that Stephen Harper killed, but then Justin Trudeau had to resurrect it from the grave. That was like the first thing he did when he won his majority, was bring back the C-17 section, which creates these human rights commissions. If you know anything about, like, I know he's a grifter and he's a charlatan and all that crap, but if you know anything about like Ezra Levant, he was a hero at one point. He went up against these people. But in America, you will see what we go through. Canada is just 5 years down the road. With all of these like bills that don't really say anything, but they kind of do.
Well, look at Tuna 53's comment. Canada was a mistake.
You know what the you know what the best part
rake.
of that Laramie Project play, Lev? Do you know what the best part of that play was?
What
is
was
that
it?
they have to have a character that is what's her name? Phelps, where she, like literally this girl that holds a sign says God hates F slurs. Like that, imagine like having an off-Broadway play and being casted for that role. Holding up the Westboro Baptist Church sign.
Wow.
Well, we'll give it 6 months. There's going to be some poor out-of-work actor who's going to play Derek Chauvin in the trial of Derek Chauvin on Netflix.
That was. That's what I love about.
Give it 6 months.
Oh man, that's what I love about the Troy McClure bits where they were spoofing like those made-for-TV movies. One of them was Locker Room Towel Fight: The Blinding of Larry Driscoll. It'll be like the show trial. It'll be like when James Woods played the McMartin thing. It was like a made-for-TV movie. That was a pretty good one. By the way, McMartin's 100% real, by the way, for those who don't know, but that's...
And also we got confirmation. Nigel is coming in. Nigel Carlsbad is coming in. And he's all going to teach us a lesson about how ridiculous the debate about democracy is. And by the way, the results, the tally right now, we are currently at Armand 42.9% and Prudentialist 57.1%.
No, no.
Democracy has spoken.
It was a pretty close call. No, you did a really good case for it. But I would be curious, like, what would be some of the, because even somebody in the chat said now Prudential is going to spend 12 minutes taking like every single point he said and saying like why it was wrong. So why would you say the things that you were advocating for were wrong? And here we have Nigel Carlsbad coming in hot. So welcome, Nigel, and everybody subscribe right now. And one last thing before Prudentialist goes for it, I just want to announce tomorrow, Owen has already retweeted it. We are going to have Owen Cyclops back with us, and he is going to be talking with us about psychedelics. That is what is crack.
Is Daniel Pinchbeck coming this time?
He is. Daniel Pinchbeck is coming.
Oh my God.
I sent him a message here, so he did say before 5 p.m. is okay. So he did do a confirmation, and I'm just sending him a final confirmation. But cross fingers, it should all be good to go.
Finally, I get to destroy him. No.
Welcome, Nigel Carlsbad. But first, Prudentialist, how would you go through some of the things you mentioned and prove them to be wrong?
Oh, delicious. I get to take the mask off.
Yes.
So, like, let's start with violence and harm reduction. So the famous line about how, like, no two democracies ever go to war with each other. I mean, democracy itself is inherently violent, and if we want to go down, you would basically take the whole Carl Schmitt line about friend-enemy distinction. While, yes, it typically tries to, get people to not be violent by any other means, you are essentially trying to eradicate them just with extra steps. Political violence happens through, in democracy, it happens in ways in which the system itself, technically my fellow countrymen, my fellow Democrats, my fellow Republicans, it doesn't matter. We've gotten to it inherently breeds polarization, and in turn it breeds extremism. If anything, the last 25 years of Americans growing far more polarized, and to where the most liberal Republican has almost nothing in common with the most conservative Democrat. It shows in the American polity and the body politic. That's why politics are more violent now. It's why we've had more politically motivated deaths and shootings. They're inherently violent internally, not to mention that it encourages sort of democracy to be used in the same way that Schmitt would say humanity got used for imperialism. We've got, almost 100 years of intervention in the name of democracy in South and Central America. God knows how many people we've killed in the Middle East in the name of spreading democracy. And when we talk about, extending legitimacy to the regime, all that you're doing is democracy is just oligarchy wearing the mask of democracy in name only. There's no real legitimacy to the regime because most laws in the United States aren't even actually, one, read by our representatives, or two, written by our representatives. What ends up happening is that most laws in this country pretty much tell the executive agencies, hey, this is what you're going to do. And then some random, unknown, unelected bureaucrat determines what that policy is going to be for the executive branch. We have no idea who's really running the country. We have no idea who we should be holding accountable. And then we go to the most unelected body in American government, the Supreme Court, to handle our political problems for it. And that never ever gets addressed. And we're going to expand it. So it's even more exciting. But not to mention the fact that you have numerous powers of the media, consent can be manufactured, Walter Lippmann, and then, of course, the concern that people like Jeff Bezos and the robber barons of the 21st century pretty much are mandating what the government wants to do. So it's sovereignty by any other means. When you're a congressional representative and you can't even have a Twitter account to, express concerns to your constituents, where does the sovereignty lie? And then, like, the third point I made about, like, large-scale political systems need, a fractal diffused mechanism so more people to get involved to govern effectively. Clearly, that's not true. 40% of Americans don't even vote in elections. Most people don't know who their local, senator or representative is. They can't tell you what their positions are. And so that large-scale stuff becomes nothing more than a large-scale bureaucracy. So that 20% over the 80% rules. And in doing so, they're only ruling in their own interest because they could give fuck all about what the people actually want. Like, democracy in turn works best when it is indirect. It's not done with the popular sovereignty in mind. It is done for those who actually have a stake within the nation state. And if you're not doing that, then your system is just lying to itself.
And what would you say, Prudentialist? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Lev.
Well, real quick, was this a similar position to the guy you have on your avatar, Edmund Burke?
Oh, heavens! No. Burke's an infamous Whig, where Burke is very much a incremental change. And the reason why I like Edmund Burke, though, is that, one, he recognizes that the idea of popular revolution doesn't work. He's got the famous reflections on the revolution in France, which I think is seminal reading if you're remotely to the right. And then secondly, Burke has this concept of what he believes that rights aren't from sort of the social contract. I mean, the social contract exists in Burke's view, but those rights are inherited. If the people do not work to actually preserve their rights, the social contract doesn't just, who are you to alter it? Because the social contract exists before you were born and it will exist after you're dead. So you need to consider your progeny and those afterwards. You editing it, to change the rights of those who aren't even been born yet is a vast violation of that contract. And I think that people need to be aware that any citizen or any person of a nation, right, should be concerned about what comes afterward. Those rights should be preserved. And I think that the fact that he views it as an inherited thing, not just this written down on a piece of paper type deal, is important. To me,
you would consider him part of the natural law apparatus? Or?
Well, he's definitely, probably.
And that's also a high time preference. I think that plays a big role in this as well.
But I think what's interesting about Burke...
Time preference?
Oh boy,
that's another discussion.
Sure,
we'll get Steve Saylor on one day.
Yeah. That'd be the dream.
Oh boy.
No, but again, anybody.
Does Saylor do podcasts? Or?
I just want to quickly say
I know he does
again,
interviews.
my quick position is that anybody from anywhere, as long as they can get to that high time preference, then I am all for them participating in this whole thing. You know what I mean? But I'm not going to discriminate based on any other characteristic. But high time preference, that's
a dog whistle for white male, right?
No, but that's my whole fucking point. That I'm not going to discriminate between people of different races. My whole point is that
I get you, Lev.
Yeah,
I get what you're really saying.
That's what I'm talking about. No, but
that's the thing about no
democracy. Why bring it up?
No democracy. Well, 2 points. One being that no democracies go to war with each other. I think what they really mean, like at the end of the day, they mean like no, like Anglosphere or European countries go with, or even like certain Asian countries go to war with each other. Yeah, they don't really mean like African republics that call themselves democracies that fucking.
But isn't that the function of people winning wars, that they can go, well, that wasn't a real democracy?
Yeah, true. Well, no. Exactly.
Well, yeah,
Right?
that's exactly what happened
Yeah,
in
like,
the 1990s. when we
Hitler got
started bombing.
democratically elected, if I remember correctly.
Like, well, in the 90s is a good point because, I mean, well, Carlsbad,
There's a bunch
you're
of
from
dead
fucking Eastern
Bosnians
Europe.
that
You
have
know
some
what
points.
it's like. Yeah.
But this
I mean,
this is what Malice talks about this a lot. Michael Malice is that these days what democracy means is what I think is good. So when Donald Trump wins the election, it's not democracy. It's that the Russians stole it. But when Joe Biden
or it's
wins,
populism. Populism somehow isn't democracy, even though
right? Yeah,
shouldn't.
but then when Joe Biden wins and people go, wait a second, this seems a little bit fishy. They go, how dare you? You don't believe in democracy. So it's just whatever you think is good, that's democracy, and whatever you think is bad, that's not democracy.
Yeah, that's the true Chad Democrat, right? Like whatever I think is good equals democracy versus the virgin actually believing in democracy. Like
will the power. But that's the funny thing. Go ahead, Joel. I was
going to say there's also Quigley's point on this, which is that like historically, I mean, of course, like democracies all came to power through violence. That whether you look at the Glorious Revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and then through Anglo-American and British imperialism, this system was then imposed on other nations through a series of wars. But like Quigley's point was that whether you look at like ancient Athens or like modernity, democracies only exist in time periods where weapons technology is conducive to raising like mass armies with cheap weapons, and that democracy is ultimately a reflection of their victory in some kind of war. But as soon as like weapons technology becomes something that is difficult to administer without having some kind of like centralized oligarchic organization, democracy becomes liquidated. And so this happened to us in the 20th century now. Like, the kind of ANCAP meme of like recreational nukes or whatever. Like we obviously don't like the
John Wayne owned a battleship.
Yeah, if we're walking around with a bunch of AR-15s from Kmart, that doesn't mean we can overthrow the American government, which has like drones and fucking like nukes and like like billions and billions and maybe even trillions of dollars invested in all this advanced technology. And so like democracy
that's a fun
can only really
conversation
exist.
in itself.
Democracy can only really exist if you can overthrow the government violently, and insofar as we can't, it doesn't. It's just like a kind of like BS ritual, and even like like basically all liberalism is like rationalizing anti-monarchism, like at the base, and so like as soon as you don't really have an imminent monarchy, it kind of loses all coherence, like. Because that's all it really was historically, and now it's just this kind of like ritual that we perform to like.
But it doesn't mean that it's possible. But it doesn't mean it's possible to bring it back, or does it? Like my whole thing that I really want to bring in Nigel.
That's Quigley's point.
Yeah, I want to bring in Nigel here into the conversation, but a lot of the things that were brought up, and I think this was also brought up by that Star Slater Codex guy. I know I keep calling it that, but anyway.
Star Slater.
Yes, thank you, Gio. So what he brought up was that all these things that we don't like, that we wish that we could squash out, whether we're talking about, rabid communism or progressivism or any of these things, they're always going to come about in some way. Maybe it's going to take slower or faster, but eventually they're going to...
That's a good point, like about... Sorry, go ahead, Lev, I cut you off.
Well, I'm just thinking, like, what is the most, let's say... what is the most resilient of these systems? And if we're talking about, okay, so we can't really have a monarchy anymore. Okay, we can have a some kind of a autocratic, some kind of a dictatorship.
Which we have by default.
How long is that going to last in the not by default that you said, Gio, but how long is that going to last in its true manifestation, which we are seeing in other places in the world? Wink, wink, Buff, you know what I'm talking about.
But that's a good point about, like you mentioned, Scott Alexander. Now, he is not, I mean, there's key differences between him and Big Yud, but like Big Yud's a good example of arguing why the sort of like incredibly like secularized, reified version of rationality that you find that basically comes out of the post-Enlightenment, why that leads to this like pervasive, almost like a purposeful ignorance of like actual social conditions and social relations. So for example, he claimed he was joking, but it's like, I'm only pretending to be retarded, right? Where he said that, and this is what the rationalist mind gets you, that well, you know, people aren't having sex and reproducing now, and men and women basically hate each other, and the sexual marketplace is basically in a bear market forever. Well, it's the real reason is on an individual basis, people are just too tired with vanilla sex, so we got to go out there and start doing some Desaadian sadomasochism bullshit, and people were just like totally ratioing the fuck out of him, and he was like, no, I was only joking. But that is an instantiation of what this sort of like fixation upon not looking at macro level solutions, but only like this micro level individualism. That's where it gets you, right? It gets you to this like the ignorance of the various social gestalt. That is why people are dissatisfied on such a fundamental basis as human sexuality. But that and like, you know, by the way, that Desaad isn't what these sadomasochism people believe in, by the way. There's a difference between the fucking BDSM people that think that they're doing some kind of battalion limit experience and what Desaad was. Desaad was like, if you read the essay in Dialectic of Enlightenment, that was about pure domination. That was a mechanization, instrumentalization of the human subject as rendered down into a series of wholes to be manipulated. And so these bondage people, they're like, oh, I get a limit experience. No, that's bullshit. You're just some fucking pervert in some leather dungeon in Dusseldorf whipping yourself. Anyways, my second point before we get Nigel Carlsbad is about Burke, the notion that the natural social contract exists before the citizenry, and it was always there, and to take away or distort the rights of the people that were granted from that social contract, then that is a fundamental perversion of democracy. And so that's like the basic, you know, Burkeanism is like basically conservatism before, I would say, William F. Buckley, before he came along with the neocons and fucked everything up. So that's the conservative. But what's interesting about Burke is that the additive aspect of rights, because that's what people are really debating about now, and that's like every single social debate that we've ever had since like even before Ronald Reagan, since I would say 1956, right? So it's the additive aspect that Burke would also say is a perversion of that initial natural law social contract. But of course, when conservatives say that, well, it's not just when you limit people's rights, but when you add to them with various nonsense issues, then people go, well, there's no such thing as enough of a good thing. Why do you want to take away people's rights? Because what's someone's rights nowadays? Anyways, you know, you got the point. Carlsbad, please go into this debate, why you think it's bullshit, and also your disagreement with Aris on Twitter. By the way, follow the thread. You two are going back and forth. And it also relates to this discussion about democracy and proper rule.
And we're gonna answer the ultimate question: Nigel Carlsbad or
but
Nigel...
let me, before Carlsbad goes,
let me finish my joke.
Let me read what he said. Okay, go ahead, Lev.
Okay. It's ruined now, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Crazy motherfuckers. Okay.
So Nigel Carlsbad said, "Can't imagine a more outdated." A more outdated debate. Democracy as an idea has been solidly eclipsed in favor of ethnically empowered technocracy, yet people still come out with the guy, don't you know popular sovereignty is a fiction, take as if this is any lasting relevance. Then I believe under he was going to say how NRX are a bunch of pedantic spurgs, but that's... Go ahead, love. I'm very sorry. I just had to read that.
Nigel, okay, here we go. I mean, it's already ruined, but it doesn't matter. I'm going for it anyway. Nigel Carlsbad.
So Nigel Carlsbad.
Jesus fuck! Oh! Okay, here we go. Nigel Carlsbad.
F's in the chat for Lev getting cut off by Geo. Like,
we have to have a tally. We have to have like a counter. And then once it reaches a certain number, like I get a prize or something. I don't know. But anyway, Nigel Carlsbad or Nigel Carlsgood. That was it.
Oh wow, that's what we were waiting for the whole time. Oh my god!
I'm glad I interrupted you now. Fuck.
This is why Geo interrupts Liv. This is why.
Carlsbad.
Hits him.
It's from a city.
One of the most eminent legalist scholars of our time, Nigel Carlsbad. You hit him with that fucking cornball right there. Oh boy! Please, my friend, please, Nigel, go ahead.
What's the question?
Why is the debate around democracy fake and F-slur, in your opinion?
Because it's been superseded as an institutional form of governance. I mean, like I said, as you people mentioned earlier, the entire hysteria around populism, the way that freedom of the press and free speech, that quintessential liberal right of the 19th century, has now been pathologized as, hate, as something that has been completely rejected. In favor of pure dogmatic belief in, of course, the blank slate. Because, ultimately, the problem with freedom of thought and freedom of speech, of course, is that by giving reason an absolute freedom, you're giving reason the freedom to question reason itself, because the whole exercise of reason fundamentally depends on certain ontological principles about the nature of thought, the nature of discourse in the public sphere, which no longer apply. And consequently, we're going back to the traditional model of error has no rights. In effect, we do live in a kind of progressive integralism in a certain sense.
Oh my God!
So yeah, it's now
Carlsbad's voice is so bass. He sounds like an actual vampire.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, thank you.
People think he sounds like Bap, but it's an interesting idea about ethnic like we're sort of reverting back to. Like not, I don't know, Adrian Vermeule based in red pilled Tradcath integralism, but we have this odd Fed Cath.
Vermeule's a psyop, right? That's like Bap's whole shtick, right?
Vermeule.
Oh, wow, Carlsbad agrees with Bap. Maybe Carlsbad is Bap. Oh my God.
Well then, so tell Jim from The Office he did a good job then.
I will.
Oh fuck. So this sort of ethnic integralism, I guess it's sort of similar to what the Prudentialist was talking about with our buddy Apex. I don't know if is Apex going to show up, Lev, or is he? You got a beef stick right there, beef jerky.
Apex should be showing up. I'm not sure why he's not here yet. I think he's going to show up a little bit later.
He's a busy man, so
he said he's got some reports to finish.
Yeah.
For those who want to know, this is a uncured Swede beef stick. Ingredients: beef, cane sugar, sea salt, spices, lactic acid, starter culture, no nitrates.
Who wants to know this?
Or nitrate. I do,
well,
bitch.
we have a mukbang.
I want to know
There's
this.
a mukbang audience for Break
No
the
nitrates
Rules.
or nitrates added, packed in collagen casing.
I'm so hungry. I had no breakfast. I got up and got straight on this stream, and you're killing me right now, man.
Miller's Biodiversity Farm. Guys, go to. This is not our sponsor yet, but I want to make it our sponsor. Miller's Bio Farm. This is where you go to if you're like around the eastern. Yeah, raw milk. This is where I get my raw milk from, guys. So they also have these nice beef sticks, and there we go. That's the.
And how do they use it?
Raw milk is legal in New York?
No, but this is online.
He's admitting to a crime. So you came up on the stream with Apex. The Prudentialist had his interview with Apex, and if you could link that, Lev. They were talking about sort of how the left is really like the true capitalist class.
Wait, send me the link. Somebody send me the link.
Yeah. But in terms of this sort of notion of like we're going back to an ethnic integralism. It's really weird how in some ways you could see this with how like we always talk about woke capital and all of this stuff and where it came from and so forth. But it's just that when order breaks down in terms of like actual power in society, when it becomes something that is diffused, then you get to see these weird sort of interrelations happening where the forces of capital link up with like manufacturing consent, but also link up with sort of selective ethnic solidarity. And now the ethnos once again determines true political rule. I mean, look at the Chauvin trial. Like you basically have representatives threatening the what do they call it? The jurors saying that if you don't vote our way, you know what's gonna happen. Some cities you're gonna go ooh. You know,
The
then
political consciousness of these
yeah.
ethnicities is also constructed by the
Yes.
same technocracy. Like
exactly,
I mean, I've
exactly, yeah.
ranted about this before, but we use the term liberal out of a kind of cultural inertia due to not having a better term for it. But what we would call wokeness is unambiguously a post-liberal phenomenon. I mean, if you actually read scholarship, for example, by feminist legal studies, and I wouldn't recommend you do read it, but I have. And
like Martha Nussbaum and yeah.
Well,
no,
Nussbaum,
she's too much of a liberal, but
Nussbaum's kind of like an Aristotelian in a kind of bastardized sense. I mean critical theory in its purest form.
You mean like Octavia Butler and all, and like the Young and all those people?
Yeah, lesser known scholars, from like whole critical legal studies, feminist law, all these kinds of things. They're based on explicit rejections of the cardinal principle of liberalism, which is of course civic equality, right? Equal protection before the law, which is fundamentally the idea of equal protection is that there should be no hereditary classes, estates, or dignities in a state, and that everyone should have the equal title of citizen, and that all rights should flow from this, from the status of citizenship, which is an equal relation between sovereign and subject, and of course the sovereign is actually yourself because it's popular sovereignty, right? But of course, equal protection before the law, it can't address, systemic, institutional, structural factors of inequality, and so consequently, this is rejected in favor of active favoritism on the basis of ethnicity or any other protected characteristic. The whole idea of public sphere is, of course, rejected as hateful and bigoted, because if you read Chantal Mouffe, Hegemony and Socialist Strategy, they talk about the idea of radical democratic hegemony to replace the old Marxist emphasis on historical materialism. And in fact, they are explicitly influenced by Carl Schmitt. And I don't like Carl Schmitt for many reasons, precisely because it's extraordinarily easy to co-opt him from a postmodern left perspective. I mean, Agamben, for example. So basically, the left is absolutely Schmitt-pilled, you might say. And
you're breaking my heart, Carlsbad. You're breaking my heart. But go ahead.
I ought to break your heart.
I've been rattling off about Agamben for quite a while now. So go ahead.
Yeah, radical democratic hegemony. And consequently, the basis of like equal protection has been destroyed in favor of essentially restoring a kind of ethnic caste system on the basis of favoritism. And yeah, none of the old liberal principles apply in a modern society because it's a mass democratic society. The highest values are self-actualization, self-realization, the pure, unbounded liberty of the ego. So
I wanted to get to a comment from Jake. Jake, do you agree with Nigel on that part?
I was watching somebody prank their wife, so I was not paying attention. No, I mean, I like it's interesting stuff. I don't have the I don't think I have the like academic knowledge to kind of critique this one way or the other. I know that I don't agree with democracy, but I don't agree with it for the fundamental reason that my rights are not up for debate. I mean, if you voting to take rights away from me or give me fake rights or whatever is kind of irrelevant. It is just a power play. So either you can do it or you can't. It's not. I don't really care if somebody votes for it or against it. I'm an ANCAP, I guess, and for me, it's more how do we get it down to the smallest number of people making decisions for me? Like ultimately, I would like it to be me making decisions for me. And democracy to me is just saying, well, the rest of the 350 million people in this weird geographic area that somehow exists get to decide whether I agree with it or not, what's good or what's bad. It would be better to me, like if the monarch did it, and then I'd be like, well, that's the guy who's a shithole. Like, he's the one who I don't like or like, depending on what he's doing. But ultimately, I would prefer this to be as localized as possible, and hopefully localized to just me.
Can I ask you, where do you think your rights actually come from? Because, like, obviously in the American Constitution, the argument is made that they're given by God, and this is like, probably the most like OG view is that there is like some kind of divine sanction for rights. This kind of comes out of the divine right of kings, just kind of repurposing it for the and kind of distributing it amongst the citizenry. But like if you look at something like the UN Declaration on Human Rights, it doesn't actually give any explanation for where the fuck rights come from. It just kind of asserts that a bunch of them exist.
Well, and this is kind of what Spooner talks about too, where it's just like the Constitution is just a piece of paper. Like it doesn't.
Like
Alexander Spooner. Haven't heard that name in a long time.
Yeah. If you look like de Maistre, he talks about how like actually writing a constitution presupposes that it already exists in the kind of spirit of a people, because for it to be written down, it's like he says, like, you don't write something down if you don't already kind of know it to be true. It has to already kind of, and so he says, the Constitution of France is written on the hearts of Frenchmen, and that writing it down, he actually advocates not writing it down, because he says writing it down kind of can make it subject to kind of arbitrary semantics, and like we can lose the spirit of what it actually is. So I'm curious, where would you say your rights come from? Because if you're ANCAP, presumably you don't think they come from a divine source.
Well, I mean, I would say, would be kind of the Rothbard approach to this would be it's just derived from basic property rights. There's really only one. You really only have one right, and that's the right to self-ownership. Everything else is extrapolated.
Yeah, but where does that come from? Like, where do you get that from?
That nobody else has a higher claim on your life than you, because you're the first one who homesteaded that. So, I mean, I guess you could maybe make the claim that maybe
you're in your body, therefore you own it. Is that basically your argument?
Yeah, you were the first one there. I mean, unless you can somehow transfer yourself out of your body, then.
So then I could bring in, like, I guess, like the Filmer argument, which is that, well, you were born to parents, like, weren't your parents actually in ownership over your body when you were born?
And Rothbard actually addresses that too. Is that parents do have a right, but it's not a right to your body. It's they've homesteaded the right to raise you, so they've homesteaded the parenting right, and so it's just extrapolated from homestead theory, is that the first person to mix their labor with an unowned object is the one who owns it. And since
why is that true though? What's like why does mixing your labor with something mean you own it? So, like,
well, who has why do you have a higher claim on that? There just wouldn't be a logical reason why your claim would be higher than my claim.
I think it's. But it is
put a gun to your head and be like, do what I tell you.
Yeah. Well, and you can do that. And that's basically what democracy is you got 51% of the population putting their gun to the head of the other 51% or 49% saying, do what I say. And
well, in Canada, it's 30% because we have.
So you're a moral nihilist. You don't believe in any morality outside of your arbitration over your own behavior. You should be able to do whatever the fuck you want, as long as it doesn't
I think that
me.
Like ANCAP political philosophy, I don't think makes a determination one way or the other on that type of morality. Like I'm a Christian, so like I have a Christian perspective on things, and in particular, I'm a Quaker, so I have a Quaker Christian perspective on things. That's how I frame my moral hierarchy, I guess, and would make my decisions and stuff on it. Like there's a lot of things that I say, well, yes, that should be legal. I don't think you should do it. I think it's immoral. But as long as it's not hurting somebody else, I don't see there to be any sort of legal.
Well, obviously there are some things that don't need, like you would disapprove of. They don't necessarily need to be like illegal because of just like practical reasons. But at the same time, like surely, like if something is morally true, like if you actually believe in a moral system, like shouldn't you impose that on others? Like for example, the abortion thing. Like if you believe that they're actually committing murder, shouldn't it be illegal to engage in this? Or shouldn't it be illegal to sell heroin to children? I mean,
so I guess I would say you shouldn't sell heroin to children, right? And in that case, you're violating the property rights of the parents that have homesteaded.
Okay, well, sell heroin to adults then. Shouldn't that be illegal?
It is what?
Shouldn't selling heroin to adults be illegal?
No. I don't think you should do heroin.
Okay.
But no, I think like the thing about the question of cultivation of property, and again, this is what Apex was talking about. in terms of like how Marx and like Marx just takes up the assumptions of Locke and Ricardo, that by cultivating something, by having sort of a seizure of the means of production over it, then you are by default entitled to the fruits of your labor somewhat. It's just the way that they go about it is, different, because then with Marx you have, you are alienated because of capital, you are alienated from your property by your labor. There's commodity fetishism, which then further abstracts that process of labor and through specialization and so forth. But then of course Locke is like, he sort of stays around that, he hovers around this concept of cultivating something and property rights. Like, so this question of like private property is interesting. I personally believe, like, I'm not a Marxist, I believe that property is something much older than just being instantiated by capital. I think that capitalism is relatively recent, like it's not ancient compared to, property is something older. I don't agree with Marx there, but I do agree to the extent that capital in a lot of ways takes that notion of originary cultivation of property and then further abstracts it and contorts it, and then
Like-
suddenly you're a wage slave and you're wagey and a cagey, while neats are fun and sleep all daisy or whatever. The fucking.
But then you also have with like liberalism and capitalism this like fundamental juridical shift where like the pre-liberal juridical paradigm was centered around status. So like under
Yes.
feudalism, that like the certain roles and responsibilities people had relative to property was all based upon like status and like
family lineages.
family lineages and so forth. And then this all becomes kind of abstracted into, we have like this abstract legal individual, which is like a legal creation that can enter into contracts freely. And like this is like the basis of like liberal juridical paradigm. The problem with this though, I find, is that like that abstraction is just kind of asserted, but it isn't actually reflection of like a fact, because at the end of the day, like status still exists. We're embedded in institutions. Like you bring in like Veblen's institutional analysis of capitalism, there is no real like way of exactly working out where your labor starts and someone else's labor begins, because like if you want to talk about like, well, my personal arbitration of my own life is a reflection of my own labor, and therefore I kind of like own my own arbitration. Well, that's not actually true. I mean, everything that you think is conditioned by sets of like educational institutions, media institutions, like a whole bunch of like institutions that go back behind you, including how you're raised. Like if you were raised in the church, there's this tradition. There's all your ancestors. There's like the kind of political body and culture that you're a part of, and you kind of owe like a debt to this kind of nexus of institutions that you're involved in, that you cannot really kind of like take the individual out of in a way that actually I think makes any rational sense. And so we're kind of hopelessly kind of mixed and embedded together. And this was Veblen's critique of capitalism, which is that if you think about like it's kind of like arbitrary how we decide how much to pay people for their labor, because like ultimately, like think about like manufacturing like a laptop. There's like literally hundreds of thousands of people that have like contributed, whether you go all the way back to like Aristotle contributing like epistemologically, ultimately down the track to like a whole bunch of disciplines that enabled engineers to be trained to build the laptop.
Although
All these different components that are built. And so like not that we shouldn't pay people for their labor or attempt to do this, because obviously it's of practical concern, but just simply that like there is this kind of inherent institutionality that you have to kind of respect, and this kind of collectivity that needs to be respected.
That's a fairly banal point about the division of labor, which is hardly contrary to liberalism. I mean,
it's contrary to this notion that like the individual like has self-ownership. If you define self-ownership in terms of like, well, I mix my labor with what I do primarily, therefore it belongs to me. I think this is contradicted by the fact that like the very process of like gaining discipline over yourself is embedded in this institutional framework. And so like your self-ownership, insofar as it exists, like your kind of self-discipline is a reflection of discipline by your parents, other like hierarchical institutions. And so like I don't think that the division can be made cleanly.
Although you seem to be mixing up the question of cultivation of virtue with legal right of property. I mean, these aren't exactly clearly related. I mean,
well, but it also, I think, in this same kind of question, when you're like, well, you don't own all of these things or whatever, but if you decide that you want to take it from me, I could make the same argument about what you're trying to take from me. Well, you don't own it. And you have this backup of all of these cultural things and these things that you didn't fully, engage in, all that sort of stuff. And you've decided though that you've asserted a right over my stuff to take from me to give out to this amorphous cultural group that
this is fundamentally a very skeptical and deconstructive way of arguing. You're effectively annihilating the boundaries for the hell of it, but there's nothing particularly enlightening about any of this. I mean,
no, well, I guess like my point is like if you have like some like hardcore ANCAP position against like any form of taxation or something, I'm saying, well, no, like there is hierarchical institutions that should be able to put claims on you that you don't have the authority to violate. There should be like positions of status. Like obviously I'm not disagreeing with like property rights in general. Obviously I believe you should have them. But that they should be limited. They shouldn't be like absolute and fundamental. They
sure, but that's not contrary to liberalism either. So it's like you're really
because then in the liberal state you could justify taking away someone's property by some kind of like utilitarian metric
exactly.
Of like
if you can condense where you would disagree with Jacon,
like
when
in
it
America,
comes to,
like the
liberalism.
government seizes property all the time for public work projects. That I mean, even to the point, like look what happened with Killdozer.
Eminent domain.
Yeah, you're doing something with the Killdozer case, Prudentialist?
Not to mention that liberalism was founded on the expropriation of the property of the church and the aristocracy. So, like, liberals aren't exactly the greatest defenders of property rights, I mean.
But even like that argument that a lot of people make from ostensibly like a liberal egalitarian framework of like, well, why can't we just like go to the Catholic Church, man, and take all the statues and sell them and give them to poor people? It's like that's
but this is what I'm saying. I'm saying that property rights themselves have to be embedded in these institutions that confer status. And so, like, I mean, I would consider myself to be kind of like sympathetic to like pre-liberal monarchism or whatever, and like traditional hierarchies as being in kind of like. I would have fidelity to these institutions and say we should respect them. We shouldn't just liquidate them into just like, as you said, like utilitarian calculations or whatever is expedient today. But we should like try and cultivate a kind of respect for where these things come from and have.
But how does that work? Who is going to run that engine of facilitating that respect?
Well, like traditionally, basically you had the church that would administer a kind of, moral paradigm that would articulate, like, I guess, like the kind of fundamental beliefs that you would have in terms of like the legitimacy of certain status, and then you would have like a kind of like established tradition that would, like a political tradition that would also kind of determine like. So like,
although you're thinking in a very sociological functionalist paradigm. I mean, the church as if it exists not for the salvation of souls, but purely to teach dogmas. If the role of a church is simply the instrumentalist value of dogma, then any church will do, including the universities, perhaps.
Sure, I agree with this. I mean, like, I would affirm the church not simply because it does this role, but because it's true that it the essence of Christianity fundamentally, in my opinion, is true. And so I say, well, our society should be based around its truth, and like that ultimately, like divine providence reveals itself through Christian teachings. So
what about?
And now the problem with the liberalism as you see it is that now people have a choice. People can choose whether to go to the church, or people can ignore the church.
Well, it's not about them choosing to go to church even, but it's just this idea that man can decide what my rights are, how society should be organized according to our own. Like as Carlsberg said, through this sociological functionalism, we can like have this intellectualization of how shit works, and then create a method of justifying authority and justifying property norms or legal norms or whatever based upon this. And I find this to be subject to a kind of infinite recursion because as soon as you claim this, that like your intellectual rationalization is capable of determining who should be in charge and how society should work, you're essentially saying you are a sovereign. You're like creating, like, you're basically converting your intellect into a sovereign or into a deity almost. And so like ultimately rights, legal norms and so forth have to be given by some kind of like a source that comes prior to like your rationalizations,
and this is why. Well, go ahead, Jake.
Okay. Well, I was going to say is that we have, in ANCAP, whatever, like our sort of group, we do have a lot of thinkers who do talk about this type of thing. In particular, Hoppe kind of arrives at the conclusion that, you will end up with basically mini monarchies, but or just kind of your own communities of people who agree, basically. And Walter Block talks about this a little bit, is kind of when he was posed the question at one point that, will we ever, live in an ANCAP society? Will we be free? How do we achieve that in our lifetime? And he said, well, frankly, you won't be able to, because our culture is not adapted for it. And it takes over time, the culture has to have, it's a process of discovery. So it discovers what is true or what works. And over time that is integrated into the culture. And the reason that we push for more liberty is because A, it's fun. And two, or B, I guess A and two, B, it's because this is what I would say is morally correct based on the morality that I have arrived at. So I don't expect to live in Ancapistan, but that is where I would like to live, and that's what I want to push forward.
This idea of there being a process of discovery, you're kind of like you're kind of this kind of presupposes that politics like is itself this epistemic process by which if we engage in like arbitrary political engineering, that somehow we will discover the truth, as opposed to truth being revealed. If truth has already been revealed, the process of trying to discover it through a process that you administer is an usurpation of the revealed truth, or it's a violation of. It's basically like a fundamentally heretical move against Christianity, in my view, and ultimately that's what liberalism is, and all these different modernist ideologies. They're all heresies. They're all based in heresies against theology, and ultimately they're basically fundamentally based in rebellion against divine authority. Like the idea that you can never create an institution. This is like the paradox of sovereignty, is that you can never create an institution that can rationally determine who should be in charge, that isn't itself in charge prior to any kind of institution rationalizing its authority. Otherwise, you have to keep creating more and more institutions behind the institution which is in charge that determine its legitimacy to determine who should be in charge. And this can go on recursively. At some point, you have to it has to be received from a divine source. Otherwise, you're just going to be subject to this infinite regress, and you're never going to discover who's in charge, because no one can be.
This reminds me, I had a teacher in high school who used to argue with us that monarchy was the correct form of government because they rule by divine right. So who can argue with that? God said so. That's what this kind of
that's a terrible argument for monarchy, though.
Oh, it is a terrible argument, but I mean, this seems to be kind of like what I'm hearing from you, Joel, is that at some point you just have to go, oh well, God said so, and as a Christian, Quakers have something that we call the continuing revelation. So God continues to reveal truth to you, and it's up to you to listen and discover it. So you're like a Montanist, like a Tertullian, like there's additional revelations, maybe Mormonism is the correct one. I don't know. It's definitely out of Protestantism. So, it's a continuing revelation, meaning that
I'm a Protestant. I'm an old Protestant / post-Protestant trying to repent and return to the true faith of Catholicism.
But that's what I was going to say, Joel.
So I defer to Nigel on this question, and perhaps even Gio, who have more experience with being Catholic than myself.
Well, I'm
trying my best not to speak heresy.
No, but what comes to mind to me, this is why I think if you truly believe in apostolic Christianity, as I am a Catholic, because it is my genetic religion as an Italian, I think that you'd have to reject sort of any sort of latent Kantianism that comes about us through that sort of like Lutheran Protestant heretical tradition. Because what does it say? Then again, this is the end of perpetual peace, right? I mean, this is taking on Kant's moral project. So everyone gives each other the moral law in a rationalistic framework, and it is the sort of synthetic a priori that gives structure to the universe, because it is, the factory. It's like the categorizations of the understanding. Sense input goes through them, then reason presupposes the noumena. I'm not going to get into Kant, but the thing is, with Kantianism, in terms of perpetual peace, his last essay, when everyone gives each other the moral law, that is a radical decentering of authority in terms of what was before the ancient divine right of kings and the sort of the Christian notion of supreme authority coming from God. And then it is just, now I think experimentation can happen in terms of the proper systems that can adhere originally to the true authority. But when it comes to this sort of free-wielding, like post-Protestant notion of political experimentations becoming a source of truth within itself, that comes all from like that tradition from Kant till Law, then later Locke and so forth.
Like, even the divine right of kings is a Protestant construct, like
if you read
but
John
Gio,
Mill
what if
figures,
what if we replace people with robots so they can live out this Kantian ideal?
There are neo-Kantians that are actually doing that, right?
And we will call them
experiments.
And we will call them. You know what we will call them, Gio? We will call them Kant bots.
Oh my
Oh boy.
I can't believe you said that.
Oh my God.
How dare you?
But here's the problem, fellas. All of the things that we're talking about right now, this is all theory.
Do they have quali, man?
We
Do
haven't
robots
lived.
have quali?
We haven't lived back then, and again, like I always say, like we don't really know what exactly it was like. We assume that the church operated in this way, and these were the laws that were listened to and were paid attention to and were followed. We don't really know. History is written by the victors, which is why, again, like there's always this weird thing about all of us being so spoiled, sitting in the lap of luxury relative to all the things that have come before, and talking about what if we had these great religious monarchies.
No, but here's the thing.
Yeah, no, we're so lucky. I'm gonna go like take my HRT, chop my dick off, and get my COVID injection, bro, and just embrace modernity.
Yeah, but here's but that's
the other thing too. Is we can also see that it doesn't work. What's going on right now doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that. But Joel, when you're talking about chopping your dick off and all that, my only response is, what you're attributing this to, how long would it take for, if somebody were to come in, were to institute some kind of a monarchical religious rule, how long would it take for all this stuff that we're dealing with right now to come right back in action? Because
in some ways it's inevitable.
Someone instituting a monarchic rule does not necessarily mean any problem would be solved. It's that's not the point. The point isn't like, well, if monarchy happened, it would be like yeah, I could make a series of arguments for this, but the point is more just what I'm concerned about is how do I serve authority, and the only way in which I can serve authority is in a sense by, fundamentally by becoming a Catholic, in my view, or becoming at least a Christian.
But also
at the same time, it would be by essentially changing my attitude so as to allow for some kind of authority to exist and kind of affirm that it can literally tell me what to do.
Well, that's
as
great,
opposed to you about take a knee. Now, if everyone had the attitude of being ready to take a knee, and ultimately, rather than this liberal attitude of everything needing to be rationalized to this ideological backdoor that is recursive, I feel like that would be very interesting. I feel like what kind of authority would be able to step into that stage that had been constructed by
but Joel, notice the words that you were using. You were using the words I and me, which is great. You're talking about yourself as an individual taking charge, as opposed to advocating for a position that everybody's going to take. And the question for me is,
I do believe other people should take this position, but ultimately,
Yes, you believe other people should,
categorical imperative.
But it's different from saying that you're going to create a system that's going to force people to adopt that position.
No, but this thing about force, here's the difference, and then I want Childerberg, and then Carl's back. Then Prudentialist hasn't talked in a while. So Aurum in the chat, Aurum says that there is no utopia in a fallen world. I think the question is of priorities and of what is predicated as value in terms of which social arrangement can maximize which value. Now, clearly in a monarchical or, well, I mean, I know, Carlsbad, you don't like the term neo-absolutist, but let's just say in a monarchical traditional arrangement where we do have sort of rule by the authority of the church and of, you know, Christ, the church being, you know, the sort of the vicar of Christ. Now, let's say we have that. The real value that is trying to be maximized is the value of that authority and how a citizenry can properly integrate Christian authority in their lives, right? It's not this sort of like utilitarian maximalism of occluding suffering from people's lives or maximizing eudaimonic happiness, whatever that means, because originally it meant virtue ethics, but now it means like whatever makes my pee-pee feel good. It's like that is the social mechanism by which you can craft a society. Now, if you are a Christian, I truly believe if you are a Christian that is living in a modern Western sort of like technocratic rule by these various at one point a de-essentialization of certain aspects of identity. So this is very much like postmodern. It's a very like baby brain version of postmodernism. But at the one end, you also have this incredible, in America at least, but it's becoming around the world, this essentialism around race and how intergenerational trauma. By the way, I do believe in intergenerational trauma, believe it or not. In a postmodern theological sense, I believe that there's a metaphysical claim to intergenerational trauma, not the way that the wokes think of it, not in the way the fucking Ibram Kendis and Ta-Nehisi Coates of the world think of it. Because like Ta-Nehisi Coates, he's like the rare breed of black fedora tipper, which is crazy. But I think that when it comes to this question of a proper society, it is what I truly believe that as a Christian nowadays in modern society, you do not live in a social arrangement that maximizes your connection to divinity. And so by saying that, you know, like certain sects of like liberal Christians do, or even back in the day with certain off groups that say that a social arrangement has to maximize people's like, you know, sort of utopian vision of like what a Christ-like society is on earth, I believe that's still a heresy in terms of saying that, yeah, you know, heaven is above, but we should also make heaven and earth. That is explicitly in some ways a heretical notion of what a Christian society
the
is.
eschaton.
Exactly, yes. And so then you get very weird, like neo-Gnostic cults that essentially arise and take up political power. And so Christianity, from time immemorial, is sort of at war with its own tendency to devolve into Gnosticism without proper authority above it. And so, Jake, I know you're a Quaker and you're one of these groups that believes in that. You know, you didn't really go to war with the American government. The American government kind of like fucked you guys over, but like, but in terms of ideas, you're kind of one of these Christian groups that believed in sort of like eminentizing a certain eschaton of like, you know, peace on earth and nonviolence and
but I mean, even like as a Catholic,
just totally fucked you over anyways. But
yeah, you believe that Christ will return one day, correct? Like, you know, this is yes. So then, how would you prepare for that? I mean, by like setting the stage for like the kingdom of God to like Christ to return and rule the earth, right?
You're confusing the last judgment of the millennium. They're not the same thing.
Well, yeah. So there's a lot of Protestants, especially American Protestants, believe in the whole rapture thing and stuff. Quakers don't believe in that. That's that's a new thing, kind of
based in Red Bull.
But there, I mean, I do see your point. Is that like so? What I would say, it's kind of like, so what you're describing is basically Woodrow Wilson. I mean, you know, the kingdom of earth. He'll bring the kingdom of God to earth through violence, and that's sort of something that like Quakers reject because it's a peaceful religion. We don't believe in that, but what we believe is that you act it out on your own. The kingdom of God is in you, so it's up to you to bring that out into the world through your own actions. But but I see what you're saying though, is that like Woodrow Wilson believed that he was appointed by God to make earth ready for the second coming of Christ, and you know, and make the world safe for democracy. So you know, he marches into somebody else's war that had nothing to do with the United States, and
War that should
basically
have happened anyways. Yeah.
but it set the stage for World War II. It set the stage for the geopolitical situation we're in right now. I mean, we're still millions and millions and millions of people are dead because of that.
And their bloodlines and their noble bloodlines as well. You know, I mean, that's the great genetic, like that was the great
We're talking about intergenerational trauma, intergenerational trauma. Look at like the Germans, like they're a
that was
pale
pretty much
representation of their former self. Like,
and the Japanese as well. Not to say I justify, you know, the Japanese genociding Chinese people or whatever. But
okay,
like,
I say this every on that chat thing. I say this every single time it comes up. Is Quaker Oats are not Quaker. So the reason that they're called Quaker Oats. The reason they're called Quaker Oats is because is one of the testimonies of Quakerism is honesty in business, or it's good stewardship of business and honesty.
Oh,
and
I get it. It's like a marketing thing. Like
it's a market. It is
Quaker
exactly
Oats.
a marketing thing. Is that the Quaker Oats company put a Quaker on it because it used to be other oats. Well, because other oats, they used to mix oats with like brick dust and stuff like that.
That's right.
like
Italian,
Baptist oats or something, or like
Mormon oats. Mennonite oats.
Gio, you mentioned the German war guilt case, and this is actually interesting because Panayotis Kondelis has a great essay on this, on the German Sonderweg, the historiographic thesis about the German special way. Now, post-war, the idea of German guilt actually has a very self-serving function, because essentially, you know, the Germans were, by having their empire stripped from them and being reduced to a kind of, you might say, internal colony of the European Union, although one with a certain priority, you know, by affirming one's guilt, you're essentially abdicating your political responsibility in favor of living a life of pure consumerism without any kind of, you know, so it actually does have a kind of a therapeutic function, you know. It's interesting, but of course ultimately this depends on how long the consumer goods will keep rolling, you know. Like if you're rich and well fed and, you know, living in luxury, you can say, oh yeah, my people are responsible for the Holocaust, oy vey, blah blah. But as soon as the goods stop rolling, then, you know, people aren't gonna be as happy to proclaim their guilt, you know. So
based.
Interesting, yeah.
I think that's what we're seeing right now, not specifically with Germany, but with I wouldn't say late stage capitalism, but as the United States starts to wind down, we are seeing sort of everybody getting sort of what everybody was talking about earlier, where people are becoming more tribalized, with it, whether it be political groups or ethnic groups or gender, all of this sort of stuff, is people are no longer willing to just kind of go with being, you know, for men, a lot of this is like they're the butt of the joke. I mean, if you just even go back to, you know, the early days of television, like every single commercial is like, oh, dad, he's a dummy, that kind of stuff. And like men are like, oh, I guess so. And now it's like, no, like there's a serious problem, and we all sense it, even though we still are talking on Zoom, you know, living there with our computers and all that sort of stuff. And we're like, this is not, something's wrong, and it's going to go wrong very badly, very quickly. And we can't, there's a general sense of this. There's I would say, at least in America, there's a very high level of tension that I think is, I mean, it's caused by a lot of stuff. And I think it's caused by high time preference a lot. It's the moral decay, this sort of along with that moral decay. And
wait, don't you mean low time preference?
High time preference is you have a preference for like immediate
things now. High time preferences, you want things now. Low time preference.
Oh, okay. Then
it's the other way around.
Yeah, so I switched it up at the beginning. Yes, because it sounds like high time preference means like, oh, look at all this high amount of time that.
No, high time preference means present centricity. That's what.
Yes, yeah. But it's right now, because of the way that things have been, you know, maybe to kind of go back to what Joel was saying, the way that the institutions were set up is that you almost have no ability to be low time preference, because if you don't spend, if you don't consume now, it's not going to be worth anything in a year from now. So and there's a lot of these opportunities that have sort of are, I would say, biologically part of the tradition of humanity, are just not there anymore. They're just sort of removed
But also,
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. What Lev was saying before. If we had like a monarch come to power, they're going to magically click their fingers, and everyone is going to be like re-embedded in these like familial structures and traditional religious practices. Like that needs to be rebuilt. I guess you could say organically.
I think
it's going to take a long time, if ever.
Wait, Joe, are you looking at it from like a perspective of like Men Amongst the Ruins type of thing, where first it has to fall down, and then slowly but surely people will rebuild again?
Well, yeah, well that's history, right? Yeah, empires collapse.
But that's that's always that saying is that easy times create soft men and hard times create hard men. I mean, I would say that maybe the best case scenario is that I wouldn't even say a managed collapse, but maybe a more gentle collapse or whatever. And I think one step that would really help is like if somebody proposed a bill to expel California from the Union, and then that would kind of set a precedence that actually this can be balkanized. We can break this down.
You know what you remind me of, Childerberg? Go ahead. No, but really quickly, Lev, you have to make me this meme where it's the one that's like, fuck off, I don't believe in that superstitious bullshit. You know that meme where it's like the soy jack? One of them is like the rat utopia experiment, and the soy jack is like, fuck off, I don't believe in that shit. Then at the bottom it's the prison experiment, Stanford prison experiment, and he's like soy facing over it. So anyways, go ahead, Prudentialist. You haven't talked in a while.
Oh well, no, it's just we are in that stage of decline, and I think to a point where there's some that say that it's managed. I think that to a degree that you could say that it's managed is that, there's some managed decline that we're seeing from at least the current regime out. The degree of which I think that they've let the cat out of the bag and how much control over it is definitely up for debate. But my concern and my focus in my studies has been a lot on foreign policy and international relations. Is that sort of internal empire that controls the United States will not allow the balkanization or dissolution to take place. And the reason why is I look at the Soviet Union collapse in 91, and I look at the fact that the United States is the second most nuclear armed state on earth. The fact that, if any sort of balkanization were to take place, you're immediately inviting a foreign power to intervene or some sort of, international joint effort. And that concerns me because there are so many people I see on Twitter that shitpost and simp over like, based China. And I think to myself,
Baizus,
well, not even Baizu. Well, that's its own thing. But like,
I did tweet it the other day, and I felt like tweeting white liberal was too on the nose. But yeah, I know, like the Eric Stryker people, they talk about the sin of
like logo the other day.
Yeah, or Spandrel, or Go ahead, Prudentialist.
Oh, no, you're fine. But it's just like, congratulations. Like you say that they're based now, but I mean, if we can look at how other, how they handle inter-ethnic tensions within their own borders, like it becomes sort of a devil versus the devil you don't know. But on the grounds of how do you reverse this, and this is where maybe my recent foray into my own politics is, because like in the last year, if you were to ask me what my positions were a year ago, they're not what they are now. I guess that's what happens when you get out of the cities and you live in the countryside. But I think about what sort of Nick Land wrote in the Dark Enlightenment is that the way that you correct these things are not, you need to take advantage of the fact that there's a system in place that sort of manufactures consent. If you can get people comfortable with the idea of, sort of these return to tradition ideas, return to these systems, managing the fact that whatever is going to come next is going to be incredibly low energy compared to previous revolutions of the past, just because of how we are politically. It's a step-by-step process. I've compared a lot of the stuff that we talk about politically, if we're ever to fix these issues, to be equivalent to some sort of cultural reconquista. It will take decades, if not centuries.
I mean, this actually reminds me of something that Jim Donald said, the old NRX blogger. He's very...
Jim Blog?
Yeah.
Oh man, that guy's had some pretty insane takes. I mean, pretty base takes,
but one of my favorite ones,
especially his do not Google his women takes. No, never mind.
No, he's a very that's his most strongest. But anyway, one of his takes, which stuck with me, is that he said that to the extent that in the United States there's going to be any kind of like reversal, it's not gonna be some kind of a right-wing revolution, something that openly breaks with the current hegemonic post-liberal wokeness thing. It's gonna be, we're gonna get a Stalin figure, but the way Jim portrays Stalin is basically, so some guy comes up as like a strong man and he says, comrades, we have successfully achieved the utopia of perfect equality, and anyone who disagrees will be shot. So that's basically the general outline. Yeah.
That will achieve year zero of equality. But I
no,
think
but no, but like basically the point is like you're saying that the present state is you've achieved the millennium, and consequently, and then by saying you've achieved the millennium, you're basically freezing progress at a certain point. And anyone who wants to carry any further gets gulagged, essentially.
But that would
and
be
also like Stalin reversed it, right? Like didn't like the kind of like the Orthodox Church slowly come back online. He kind of
kind of. I mean,
he made like gay all these reforms like that.
Stalin,
you see like leftists complain about Stalin as being a reactionary because he kind of like brought like social
vouchers
back.
No, I mean not exactly. Like I mean the persecutions of the church in the USSR continued well into the 70s, and including like many.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I didn't mean that he
Brezhnev.
reversed it completely, but he kind of relaxed it and like.
And he was
slowly headed back in a conservative
He
direction.
did also significantly reverse a lot of the Leninist 1922, 1923 laws in regards to the decriminalization of homosexuality and aspects of divorce.
It promoted like a Russian nationalist historiography, about Alexander Nevsky, people like that.
The guy who
socialist
worked under the Alexander
socialist
Nevsky,
patriotism.
Alexander Nevsky, the guy who worked under the Golden Horde, I think that's actually a very good comparison here, because we have Stalin, a guy who murdered and massacred millions of Russians, advocating for the guy who used to burn down villages that wouldn't pay money to the Golden Horde. So I think it's a very apt comparison right there, the kind of figures that get propped up.
With Russia, like, I mean, this is what I wanted to bring up. Prudentialist reminded me of when it comes to sort of like the particular brand of like Tolstoy quietism Christianity, where you've basically consented to implicitly that there's a public-private sphere, and that true Christianity, mystical Christianity, is expressed in one's own heart, and that's sort of like approach to that, like, as opposed to someone like Dostoevsky in Russia. I mean, that to me, in a lot of ways, it's like, and we could come up with this tomorrow stream as well. That was like when I was a New Ager, that was like a hip and sexy idea of like one's own private mystical Christianity. But the more you realize that vision is failed, like it's failed in the sense that the New Age itself has failed, because you're not giving it a backbone of proper authority that truly has the power to save people's souls in this lifetime. I mean, that to me, that is like, you know what I mean? It's kind of sus, because it's like what people like, this is like the fucking New Age, not New Age, the YouTube bullshit back in the day with like creationism versus evolution. It's like, well, I'm not like those crazy Christians there. I actually think that one's private life, it's good, but it shouldn't dictate public policy. And essentially now you have, after Trump, you have the Republican Party reverting back to that consensus that they had since Ronald Reagan's days, which is, well, as long as the line goes up, then we can't impose our own private qualms against Planned Parenthood or whatever. Whereas Trump, for all of his foibles, the one good thing being that he implicitly allowed a backdoor structure of private individual states having legal protection for fucking over monumentally evil institutions like Planned Parenthood. So I think but now that protection's totally lifted. Now the Republican Party has reverted back to what it was in the Bush era, before.
I think maybe there's a public. I think publicly that's true, because you do see sort of like a reassertion of the Romney types and that kind of stuff. But they're not the ones that are in control of that party. I don't think. I think that I think that the thing that Trump did is sort of gave, especially a lot of young people that were, I wouldn't even say right wing, but just reactionary to the left, sort of this idea that we're not going to, like, the left has always done it, where they want, the good example of this just happened today, that the Biden administration announced that they're going to change the capital gains tax to like 43.5% or something like that. So, which is just crazy. But immediately everybody was like, that's not what they want. They probably want about 30%. And so that like left-wing politics is always ask for the moon and accept, a high altitude jetliner or something like that. So it's like, and I think that
maximalism.
I think the right wing is starting to realize, and you see this kind of with the sort of the Ted Cruz's and the Rand Pauls and these types of people, where it's just like they'll propose, let's say that they propose a 40% tax on capital gains, and the other side will say no, 0, and let's meet in the middle at 5 with a 5% cut or a 15% cut or whatever. And I think that's what you're starting to see, that the right reposition themselves as no longer conservative and just sort of go, what Michael Malice says is conservatism is liberalism going the speed limit. And it's is they're going like, no, we're going to reverse direction now. And maybe it's edgy to be a monarchist or whatever, or like to be, a trad wife or something like that and post that all online. Like all that sort of stuff is kind of like in the face of this sort of like left wing. So it's like a reaction to that, but it's not I'm okay with gays as long as, it's private or whatever. It's no, we're going the complete opposite direction back to this other type of existence that is romanticized. I mean, this is not necessarily how things worked back then, as kind of to Lev's point, but I think that's what we're starting to see in the right wing of America, is that this Trump was a symptom of this sort of them sort of red pilling, the waking up and going like, no, this doesn't work. Like our country is going off a cliff, and we for too long sat by and we're just like, not too fast. And
I mean, that would be nice if that was true, but unfortunately I don't see this much. Like you see this with all this phenomenon of like any leftist that gets excommunicated from the leftist milieu, the right wingers are like, oh my god, they're so based because they're like centrist, or they're like,
oh, you saw my thread, didn't you?
That's pretty common.
This is not a novel take by any means, but it's like the right should say, no, fuck you. Like you can't be on our team either unless you're like super right wing.
Yeah.
Like
this goes back to the issue with democracy, though, is that it's all about coalition building. If you can't, like, that's the whole one of the whole issues with democracy is nobody's ever going to get what they want from it.
Yeah.
It's because you have to build a coalition to get any sort of political power, and I think that's what the right is, and they're historically very good at this. We talked about the race issue later. Is that the right has always been very good at integrating people into, quote unquote whiteness or whatever. It used to be Irish and the Italians were not white. And then the right brought them in, and now they vote predominantly Republican. And you see this starting to happen with Latinos, is especially Latino men, is that
Castiza futurism.
Yeah. They're being integrated into being considered white. And you see this all the time with the way that, especially second generation, Latino Americans, is that they don't mark Latino or of Hispanic descent anymore on these forms that ask for it. They mark white because that's what they feel like they are. And this is, I think, what's moving forward. That's this coalition building. The right has always been very good at it when it comes to like ethnicity and stuff like that. And the left has always been good on it when it comes to marginalization, like with the like LGBTQ plus and all that sort of stuff. These people don't necessarily have anything in common with each other, but somehow this movement has like put them all together in this one tagline and integrated them into Democratic voters. So you see this, it's about coalition building. So you see like, Dave Rubin is expelled from the left, or the left, he always says the left left him, kind of thing. And the right's like, oh, we like Dave Rubin now. And it's because they do tend to be good at integrating people that,
yeah, but that's retarded, because ultimately all that does is it integrates like if white means Hispanic, then it doesn't mean anything. And like if white means Irish or Italian, it really doesn't mean anything, in my opinion.
Yeah,
sorry, Gio,
that's because because identifying ethnicity or race based on.
We want to build a coalition to win a democratic election, but at the price of like diluting the meaning of our authenticity. Just
but that's
retarded.
That's the inevitable conclusion of democracy, is that you're going to continue to build these coalitions to get these small things that you want, and eventually it's going to break down into degeneracy, essentially. And because and this is one of the things I think that Trump did very well, is it was fun to be at a Trump rally, and so it was the first time in a long time Republicans were fun. And it used to be that it was fun to be a Democrat. They're the ones who had the cool parties.
Greatest living artist, Donald Trump. But,
yeah.
I mean, you go ahead.
But I think if to take like a more serious turn, like to bring like Christianity back, it's like in Christianity, obviously divine mercy is emphasized. Like Christ died for us and so forth. Mm-hmm. But what isn't emphasized enough, I don't think, in our culture, is wrath. and then ultimately, like, we live in a society. I mean, I think Spengler was correct to like name us Faustians, and I think we basically are entering into judgment, which we deserve. And so basically, we should say, well, we probably do deserve for the empire to collapse, because look at what it is. Like, look at what we represent. Like, we're this like nihilistic, total. You see this a lot on the right.
Yeah, but that's still
who
going
gives
to
a shit
affect-
about like
But
restoring
that's still
America?
going to affect our lives. It's going to affect our lives, the lives of our families, the lives of
Yeah.
people we know.
So Joel, you
And
mean
so when it
that
talks about,
like Nick Fuentes and the Grapers are not going to like come to power with Josh Hawley and restore order for based people? I mean, that's.
I mean, like,
America
it would be
first.
cool, but I'd go along with it. But like,
No, but
I don't
the
think
whole
this is
thing here
ultimately
is-
what is
That
right. No.
reminds me of an aphorism by Don Colacho, that modernity is not awaiting its judgment. Modernity is the judgment. That's a good- that's a
Exactly.
great
Yeah.
great quote.
Well, it's the judgment for you. It's the judgment for people who are sick and tired of, very gross things that they're seeing online. But to the point that Jake was making earlier, I do think that a lot of people, and look, I'm going to get hate for this, but I do think that a lot of people are getting, very edgy, and they're looking at things from, now that I know what the right word is, I think they are looking at it from a very high time preference, where, of course, they're going to start looking at people like John of Croissant and other, Kronstadt, thank you very much, Nigel.
Yeah.
Other people with, beards that are 6 feet long, because that's the opposite of whatever it is they don't like. I don't think it's because they have a low time preference and would be able to kind of like look at these things in terms of how are these decisions actually going to affect the people around me.
Hell is a democracy, heaven is a monarchy. That's his quote, St. John of Kronstadt,
But a Prudentialist, you had a point before about coalition.
The coalition building, yeah. I mean,
coalition.
We're seeing that take place now on the mainstream, right? We had that debate with Lauren Witzke and John Doyle against Karlin Poroshenko and what's her name? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I mean, debating about the role of Christianity and the social conservatism. But I mean, with the point on modernity, I'm reminded of that, almost memeable De Maistre quote that people get the government that they deserve. And at this point, their wrath is a very valid thing to consider. But those who keep driving themselves, I think, from what Lev was talking about, they're going through this extremism because they kind of recognize the situation that we're in. And almost wanting to immanentize the eschaton. Like, my objection to accelerationism to that point, for people who want to sort of just steer into it and see what happens to bring about the collapse, is I don't know how familiar any of you are with Paul Virilio, the French,
yes, very familiar.
Yeah, so like the original accident, right? So any form of accelerationism or any new discovery inevitably leads to the corollary that you discover its accident. We have no idea what we would bring upon if we were to immanentize the eschaton, bring about the collapse of the American empire, all these things. And that's why you hear a lot from more to the traditionalists, people who are just, trad caths or more social conservatives on the right, saying these people don't have skin in the game, right? We have become so atomized by modernity where people my age aren't married. We don't have kids. We have no job security. I'm 25 and I'm already extra screwed because I have a medical problem. And at what point do you just say fuck it and try to destroy the system? And I can understand that sort of thrashing, but it requires a ton of discipline. And I think that the benefit that Christianity provides, and as someone who's coming back to the church and coming back to Christianity, is that it provides that low time preference. The kingdom of heaven is with God. It is not on this earth, but to do what we can to understand that we must live a life in a way that at the end, people can look back and say that man lived a good life. That's essential. We cannot say, that man brought upon the end of the empire. Now we're all, essentially men amongst the ruins.
Regarding accelerationism, it's worth pointing out that it's actually originally a Marxist idea. In fact, the Marxist term is impossibilism, is the term. You can look it up. Yeah, impossibilism.
Then later Schmenek and what's his face came along and like memed it. The original book by Schmenek, or it's notoriously hard to pronounce. The two authors that wrote the book Acceleration.
But Prudentialist, I have the following question for you.
Go for it.
Do you think that somebody like yourself, who I think definitely has a low time preference, as we keep using that word over and over again, somebody like you would be able to see how Christianity would be able to imbue yourself with even more of that. Did it work historically? Did it work historically that to most people, the masses, whatever you want to call it, this was something that imbued them with that? Or were most people just going moo and, just going along with whatever they had to go along with in society, and that's it? It didn't really affect them one way or another. I just don't know, because I wasn't around that time, and I'm trying to think of what can we lean on today to know one way or another.
So, I mean, I think you get a little column A, a little column B. And the reason why I say that is because what we can apply to today's, like our society today. So what is it? Like 25% of us don't even have an internal monologue, right? That people who don't
can't envision an apple.
Yeah, can't envision an apple. They can't think about themselves, or they can't have that conversation with themselves. Like that's a good chunk of the population, and I'd imagine that there's a good chunk of them that probably existed, back during, what we would consider the medieval or the Middle Ages. And I hate using those terms as someone who studied history, but prior to the early modern era, prior to the Enlightenment.
You don't want to use the term.
Hold on.
Oh, okay.
But like,
wait,
Jake,
hold on. I'm trying for clarification. You're saying that there's people who can't like talk to themselves in their mind?
Yes.
Did you miss that whole NPC meme? That was like years ago, man.
No inner monologue. Yeah,
no inner monologue. Those people exist.
I don't even know
What's
how to conceptualize
with Jules and Milton Friedman?
Okay,
what the
Jake,
hell?
you are a what was it? A Hylic or no, not a Hylic. The opposite of a Hylic. You are a not a pneumatic, but wait, is it a pneumatic? Yeah, I think it's a pneumatic. Jake, you are a pneumatic because you have dreams where you can, incredibly lucid. Like, you're gonna teach me how to lucid dream, so you're like way up there in terms of visualization.
But and it's just, like, that's wild to me that like
people can't envision an apple in their palm of their hand and rotate it. They can't see what Husserl called the horizon, like the life world horizon around that apple. They can't intuit around it. Yeah. I, of course, think of an impressionist.
And the people that support democracy want these people voting on their rights.
I know, it's terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah. But even like with the point about Virilio, like the aspect of speed to Virilio, I think this was it War and Politics, where he said that eventually speed will become the metric by which so many things conglomerate to form the self, that the self captured within the metrics of speed and intensities will literally start to dematerialize. And so even our sense of self in the abstract will become so fundamentally like distorted within this field of constant speed of information exchange and so forth, that we literally won't even have, like, we'll achieve some sort of like light subtle body moksha of like, people will be so caught within the metrics of speed of and ease of communicativity that eventually the self will just disappear.
The ultimate disassociation.
Yeah, exactly.
How do people like this read quietly? Like when they're reading a book, how do they read quietly if they have nothing that they can like hear?
Most people don't read books, man. Like,
well, some people
I guess that's true.
That's probably why they don't have an internal monologue in the first place, because they never learned
yeah,
how to
I
get
guess
one.
I don't
studied
see it as
this,
being
the
fixed.
inner ringing. When you read a book, you sort of either read it in your voice or you read it in like a popular narrator, or you have like what do they call it, inner ringing, where
Could recommend David R. Olson's The World on Paper for this, where he talks about like the production of the internal scene of representation as a reflection of reading. So like basically his whole idea was that like metaphysics, for example, is just like it's kind of an extension of the cognitive implications of literacy, that prior to literacy, like you don't actually abstract like words from their reference, and like so then you don't have to kind of reproduce this abstract domain in your mind where those words where you kind of
signifier and signify.
But now that I think about it,
if we didn't have a signifier, I truly believe that abstract painters and people that talk about mystical experiences, they're basically pointing to pure signified. They have no signifier in terms of language. It's where language starts to break down. You could see this in atonal music. You could see this in Jackson Pollock. You could also see this in various mystical traditions. For example, if you look at the Icaros, where the Icaro pattern tapestries that they do when they take ayahuasca, which we'll talk about tomorrow. But
Yes.
sorry, that's just me being a fucking theory cell.
No, but one thing that I'm thinking about right now is, and I want to get back to what the Prudentialist was talking about, the column A, column B, but before that, one of the things that I'm noticing is that when I read, I actually don't have a narration as opposed to I have an actual image if I'm imagining a movie in my head when I'm reading the book.
Well, I can do both. Like, for example, if I read, I can have like an inner voice, but I can also do it completely silently. Like I can sort of alternate. It's not.
Yeah, like when you're reading a story, I think I'm more along what you're talking about, Lev, where you like see the story happening.
Even not a story, even nonfiction, it's just easier for me to categorize things in my head if I imagine them.
Yeah, like say if I'm reading Descartes, I could actually picture him in that boiler sitting down with his nightgown on. No, it's true. I did undergrad.
So anyway,
but I was going to explain before,
yes.
to Jake. They studied this with prisoners in solitary confinement. They call it inner ringing, where if you're alone for a long period of time in a small space, then you could like literally almost audibly like visualize and hear the voices in your head. And so they say people who are very adverse to like reading for long periods of time, they have that same reproduction of inner ringing, where like the fact that they could see like they could intuit their mind reading is very scary to them. I know it's kind of like a conjectural theory that some scientists believe don't exist, but I think that's probably a good theory as to why people are so afraid to just like sit in silence for a long period of time or reading, because reading is by definition, unless you're reading to an audience, it is a very solitary act that requires long bouts of loneliness. And for a lot of people, that's very like alienating to actually like, but I'm a slow reader. I believe in slow reading. I think that like people that cuck over, like people cuck themselves by constantly like gunning through pages. Oh, I read this book in a week. It's like, yeah, but did you like marinate that?
Well, it depends what it is, right? Like if you're reading something that's dense, you need time. But if you're reading something that you can kind of skim and kind of get the gist.
And you know what I would love to read?
And
you know what I would love to read? I would love to read some super chats. So sneed us some super chats right now. We have not gotten super chats as much in this stream. So sneed us some super chats. And Prudentialist, your column A, column B. I know we've kept you waiting on this, but I'm really curious.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, yeah, no worries. But yeah, so you have a little column A and a little column B in terms of the people with a low time preference and whether or not that was achievable. I mean, we're inherently blurred, right? Because like we weren't there, and our record of history, of course, is going to be difficult to ascertain, at least until we have firsthand accounts, I guess, so post printing press. But I say that some people probably went along with it because you have those little NPC people, or the moo, as you said. But I think the others, right? They didn't have the sort of cultural content to consume that gets us distracted. So I mean, like we go back to Joseph Campbell, where he talks about like superheroes are sort of our modern day myths, the Americana myths, the new aspect of storytelling that supplants Christianity. They didn't have that. I mean, sure, you have the great stories and you have great epics, and maybe if you were familiar with maybe the tales of Beowulf or Gilgamesh or the Song of Roland, but even then, right, what do all of these great stories of the early modern era and prior to the early modern era have? King Arthur, the Song of Roland, all of these things refer back to Christianity. So the central defining thing goes back to the greatest story ever told. And of course, we know what that means if we're Christians. The greatest story ever told is the story of Christ. And that's what this population had. And I think that's definitely what allowed them to keep going. And to give, some credit to Catholicism is that you had a centralized structure that provided the dogma, the scripture, the decades, if not centuries now of commentary on the scripture and what that means and how that all operates. It kept people going and aware of that low time preference, not to immanentize the eschaton, to know that there is something after this life. So I think that
how
you
many
have
people
that.
understood
Although
it?
people shouldn't overestimate the centralization of like pre-Tridentine Catholicism, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a lot more.
Yeah.
The Counter-Reformation was a kind of a turning point in like like the whole conception of everything, like ultramontanism, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But that goes back to
popular piety was a lot more important. In fact, one of the reasons why the Reformation never took off in Italy besides, of course, the influence of the papal states, obviously, but also because Italy had strong traditions of like popular piety and popular devotion, which
yes, novellas especially were the
which is why. Whereas in contrast, having like a pure like top-down catechismal Catholicism led to a kind of a backlash, especially in like northern countries where Protestant princes began essentially confiscating estates, effectively being attracted to like the message of sola scriptura, sola fide, with its very bottom-up approaches.
So doesn't that say something about these top
theory? My alternative theory is that Catholicism is actually genetic to us Italians. There's a gene that selects for Catholicism for us Italians. That's why we never had a Reformation. So
when you zoom in on it in the microscope, it looks like like a little rigatoni. Or
it'll be a little Pope hats.
But I still know, like, Nigel.
It's the chi of being Italian.
Yes.
I mean, traditionally, you had what was known as like the lay folks catechism. You can find many examples like written in the 13th century. So, like the minimum dogma that someone has to know to be saved is basically the Apostles' Creed, the 7 precepts of the Church, the 7 sacraments, and effectively, that's basically like it's called the lay folks catechism for like pre-literate cultures. That's the minimum, and particularly to like.
But that being said, also
participation in the liturgy, most important.
Yeah,
like basically, like most
but is
people,
that enough for low
receive...
time preference? Is that enough for low time?
No, Lev. It's because Catholicism served both a high and a low time preference in Italy, because in one end of the spectrum you have in, for example, the northern papal states, where Catholicism was more instantiated in terms of doctrine, in terms of actual intellectual pursuits, and also political power. Let's be real, right? Yeah. The papal states ensured that those families had an immense degree of political power. But when it came to the more marginalized southern peoples, which I am half a part of, I'm a half Central Italian, you had like almost
half
like
black, you mean?
Yeah, half black. So you had like almost proto-liberation theology, which is like very much laity-centric Catholicism. So it served both groups of Italy, because Italy being ostensibly a very like distrustful class-based society, even nowadays, Catholicism was like the perfect solvent, like a perfect sort of glue that held things together. Whereas,
what was laity-based? Can you explain
like what Carlsbad was talking about? It was almost like you could say the proto version of liberation theology, where it was very much centered around like poor hill people in the sticks of Italy in the south, and Calabria in Sicily. So you had like a very fundamental like communal involvement with like the participating in the liturgy and so forth. Whereas Catholicism didn't really serve the temperaments or the like affects of like marginalized peoples in other parts of Northern Europe, for instance. So, for example, the peasantry in Scandinavian countries and Protestant nations that rejected Catholicism, they were of a fundamentally different character, I believe, than...
I mean, they were Christianized quite late also. I mean,
yes, like, and that's another issue. Exactly.
Like the Baltics, for example, like Lithuania wasn't Christianized until 1396.
Yeah.
Which is very, very late. That's actually the same year that Bulgaria fell to the Ottoman Empire. So very late.
Yeah. And also you have like Christianity being introduced as basically a bargaining system between a lot of those pagan Germanic tribes, right? That took on Christianity for other reasons than like the purity of a theological understanding of it, right? So that, I mean, I think like Varg, he has somewhat of a point, but of course he's fucking crazy when it comes to Varg, yeah.
Varg Vikernes.
The best was what was the one?
Burzum's pretty good though.
Yeah, I love.
By the way,
Burzum,
I love this comment from Mumperton. He says, "Buff, he has eternal guilt," meaning me. Lev has eternal guilt for not listening to his dad and attending a yeshiva. He'd have a trad wife who would make him all the raw milk
like
he
Ben
wants.
Shapiro.
Oh man.
You know what's
I feel
funny
like having a Jewish wife would be like not worth the hassle.
No, but because Lev, he can't settle
Get a
for
good
a
Russian
nice
girl,
Sephardi
Lev.
girl. No, it's got to be.
I have a Ukrainian. He's wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Joel, if we're
yeah,
if
but
we're talking
Ukrainian
about,
women, they're different than Russian women.
if we're talking about just
Yeah.
like healthy, beautiful women, Jewish, Russian, doesn't make any difference to me. They both were, fleeing. Their ancestors were both fleeing from the same Atlantis, landed on the same Mount Ararat. So
You know
I
what's
see no
funny
difference there.
how both Jews and Italian diaspora in New York, they both come from like a culture motivated by guilt, which is kind of weird, kind of crazy. I don't know. Let's make of that what you will. But yeah,
I don't know. I don't.
Sicilian confirmed. No, I mean,
I don't. I
I
don't
mean,
feel,
the Italian immigration, it was like because of the destruction of the kingdom of the two Sicilies, like basically the occupation by Piedmont, Sardinia. So like, yeah, they literally, their state was literally destroyed, like a 900-year, about 800-year kingdom. Like I think some of like, it was like the Norman conquest of Sicily in like the 11th century. Yeah, then like the kingdom of Aragon, the crown of Anjou, and then later finally the Bourbons.
That came.
Aragon. That sounds so like a Lord of the Rings.
The side of Italy, my mother's family side comes from in Calabria.
Right,
we were conquered by the Greeks.
Yeah, Magna Graecia. Yeah.
But anyway, back to the present right now. The question that I was asking Prudentialist before, this column A, column B situation. I still think that it may be possible to retain a lot of good, healthy, and important traditions. Like, as you know, just like Gio, I'm a very family-oriented person. I think it's a great tragedy what a lot of people, especially I'd say a lot of WASP society people, have been doing in the United States, where they put older people, like their grandparents, in the old folks' homes. And I saw a really great movie, by the way, which I highly recommend everybody watch. It's called I Care a Lot. It's on Netflix right now, and for some reason, people within communities I know on Facebook hated it. This one left-leaning animation guy I know said that he canceled his whole Netflix account after seeing that movie. But I thought it was a really fun movie. It's not a movie that you're supposed to like take seriously. Like, why is this small guy in charge of the Russian mafia? It's like, it doesn't matter. That's not the point of the movie. But anyway, old folks' homes. I am against all this stuff that ends up happening, but at the same time, I really do think you can get the majority of people at least from the level of moo to a level of, let's say, something higher to aim for here. In terms
Jules
of
says a very interesting comment. Catholicism is mostly about having old people control their children and maintaining an insider class that lives by do as I say, not as I do. That's a very,
what about it, Jules?
That's a very reformed take, I would say. Yeah.
That isn't well.
But I don't know. Am I wrong here when it comes to being able to?
Besides, what's wrong with old people
of
controlling the children anyway?
Yeah, nothing's wrong with that.
No, they've lived longer. They probably know more about how to live. Like
exactly.
I think the fact that people like don't grow up living with their grandparents is probably a big reason why society's decayed. In my honest take. Yeah.
Like, I've recently started like asking my grandmothers. I've both my grandmothers are still alive. I'm lucky in this respect. I've been asking them for life advice, and generally it's actually really good. I thought, well, I was younger. I thought these people are stupid. That they're not intellectuals like me or something. Their IQ's low. I should determine my life. And I made all these terrible decisions. And then I started asking my grandmothers, and then they started giving me all this great advice. And it was like, it's like a wisdom that you have to respect, because they've been there, done that. They've had marriages and families, and they know something that I don't, basically, because of this.
And also, you realize your disposition in life better. Like as I get older, I start to realize I'm almost exactly like my mother's father, my grandfather. Like in personality wise, we're very similar. And some of it's good, some of it's bad. And you have a perspective in life of like there is like something fundamentally both physiologically genetic and also spiritual about someone's disposition and someone's beliefs. I truly believe are determined by factors outside of yourself, and you can only really get that by being involved in the lives of people that have come before you through your ancestors. And but anyways, that's
this is one of the, I've often thought about this because my family, we lived with my great grandmother, my mother's parents. My mother's parents, my family, and I have 4 sisters. We have a large family, or pretty large for modern standards, not compared to like my grandpa. He was one of 14, but one of the things that I've been thinking about lately is making sure that you are sort of in your community, like in your family community. That's important. And also one thing that I was talking to my mom about this, because she's actually, my grandma had a stroke recently, so she's taking care of her.
Oh,
and that we were talking about that, you know, when my grandmother passes, what happens to that house? Because that house, my mom, all of her brothers, she has 6 brothers. They were all raised in this house. I was raised in the house. All of us were raised there. And it's a family home. Every holiday, we always went back to that same place. Everybody. And that's the only reason that I think I know my cousins and stuff, is because we had a place to go where we could meet up and stuff like that. And that's something I think, sort of what Lev was talking about, this sort of like, I hate to say it's waspy, because we are kind of waspy in my family, but we are intergenerational too. So like we had a very tight family that, and very weird, oddly family oriented. Like people would show up sometimes that we had never met, and they were Marmersteins on my mom's side. And we just like, oh yeah, stay with us or whatever. It's like, who are you? I don't know. You're one of us, I guess. Like, and that's something that my wife and I have been trying to build, because, you know, we don't have any kids yet, but I think there's a great sense of lack of intergenerational community, because people move around so much. And I would be remiss if I didn't bring it up, that I think this is largely caused by not
the
having
roads.
No, it's not. Well, I mean, you know, the
libertarians are right all along. We have to destroy the roads.
Well, wasn't it? Was it Russell Kirk who said that the car was the mechanical Jacobin? It would take you away from your. Yeah, but no, I would say it's lack of a hard money, because in most families, the male income or female, I don't really give a shit who's working. One income can't sustain an entire intergenerational family, and it used to be that you could work together at home or on the farm or whatever, but there was one primary breadwinner, and that could sustain everyone if everybody helped out on domestic things. And we don't have that now, because our wealth is eroded by the government. And this is a high time preference democracy thing, is every single group of people that are elected, they need to get their things done now, because there's no guarantee they're going to be elected again. And so they just run up the tab. And this is, you know, I don't really believe it's bankrupting future generations, because at some point they'll default, and that'll just collapse the economy worldwide. But
yeah, I mean, one of the good things about dynastic legitimacy is the fundamental sense of continuity. Like, for example, you take the Kingdom of Hungary, like, for example, it was founded by Saint Stephen, I think around the 11th or 10th century. And, you know, centuries later, you know, like in the High Middle Ages, you have like the chapter of some monastery or some like urban guild, you know, appealing to like their customary rights from the times of Saint Stephen. So like this is like centuries of an institutional state structure embodied in the dynastic right of a person, which that's a kind of thing that you know, democratic societies simply cannot have. Republics can, like in the old sense, like Venice or like Genoa, but democracies as such, like modern, like parliamentary democracies, not really. They're very transient things. Like every new election, every new party is basically a kind of micro revolution, basically.
And it was set up explicitly to basically dick over, well, in England anyways, to dick over things like the land gentry that was based on like ancestral clan.
What do you mean? Like in England? No, like in England, the landed gentry were basically the kind of a motive force of like the whole settlement of 1688.
No, sorry, I mean like the feudal, like the older families that were like the land aristocracies that had like state, like, you know what I mean? Like the democracy, like the like post-enlightenment democracy is basically designed almost in a way.
It's actually like absolutism more that was dicking them over prior to.
Yeah, because England, the thing about England is that it never really had like a kind of a strong aristocracy in the same way that France or Germany did, because England, the nobility was always like relatively meritocratic in the sense that nobility wasn't like a kind of a independent patrimonial power. Like nobility was basically service to the king, very direct, like all the way from like Henry I, who basically founded the common law. Like, you know, the hilarious thing about it is like Englishmen, they talk about their common law as a kind of almost folkish ancestral liberty, but really common law was the creation of raw absolutism. That's a fact. Like it's the king's bench. That's what the common law court was from the Curia Regis. So yeah, it's kind of funny the way, but like the historical self-perception is very different from the way it actually happened.
It's almost like a revisionism where like liberals go back and like, well, common law actually gave us this ancestral right, but really it was the right.
Yeah, like it's like the Whig historians of the 19th century. They talk all about like a primitive Germanic liberty, like back in the Black Forest, like
primitive communism.
Yeah.
But that's what I wanted to ask you guys, all of you guys, about what do you think of like the ANCOM idea that in order to limit like political, like they fucking still conceive like they're LARPing Marxism. They conceive that power is like this 19th century thing with like robber barons. What do you think of the ANCOM idea that like basically inheritance tax should be taxed at like 100%? Like when someone dies, all of their wealth should go to the government.
Well, it's grotesque, really. I
mean, Max Stirner, of all people, actually had a very good critique of communism. He said that basically a communism, by abolishing all distinctions of property, by making property, entirely common in this metaphorical sense. So everyone is like a equally poor ragamuffin before the commune. So like basically a communist, he sees large concentrations of private wealth, and the way he's gonna solve this problem is by making sure no one has any wealth at all. Everyone's poor, and now we're finally
But the difference being is that back in the day, multi-generational wealth actually did contribute to society somewhat. It's not like they just fucking take
I would go as far as to say that I would go as far as to say that inherited wealth is the basis of all society.
It's extremely, extremely important. I think this is one of the things where, what you guys I probably would identify as like moral degeneracy is because you have no future generation to think of. All your stuff's going to be taken from you anyways. So either through inflation or through taxation. And when you are, so like you see this in like first and second generation business owners. If one person can't pass that on, he has no incentive to teach his children how to manage the business. He can't pass it on anyways. And so with the community, this is uprooting this business where he sells it to, a multinational conglomeration or something like that, or to some larger company, and it pulls this out of the community. It destroys that wealth creation in the community. It also doesn't give him the person who actually knows how to run the business any incentive to teach anybody else how to run the business. And then he retires at 50 and lives on a yacht, which is not really constructive to, society as a whole.
There's also like the ultimate end of all of this is, in my view, transhumanism, because like ultimately you're undermining
total deracination.
So like the ultimate dream is like this kind of brave new communism is like kind of brave new world where it's kind of fundamentally unequal, that we have different genetics or that we're born into different families with different parents, and so we should have some kind of like laboratory where we like grow everyone with the same genetics and then like raise them all in the same institution so that we can all be finally equal. And like this is a kind of imminent technological possibility, which is I think really going to be the defining kind of political problem of our time. I think really the battle lines will be drawn between, I guess you could say, Christianity in its essential meaning in Western civilization, and kind of bound up with these ideas of the family as being a kind of vector of divine providence versus like this kind of transhumanist attempt to like build our own God and become our own source, like essentially, like
total
whether you look at like AI or I think AI is a meme that is fundamentally based on incoherent assumptions.
You should read Scott Laughlin. Like he very capably, like he's a kind of like physicist and programmer, like in his 50s, I think, who all these like technical facts he completely annihilates,
But I think in terms of like growing children in vats and like genetic engineering, like this stuff I think is
this world we must leave as a tax.
It's already being developed right now, like with like CRISPR technology, or like I posted.
Although actually, I think actually a few weeks ago, China actually outlawed the genetic engineering of infants. By the way, they did.
Which is
well,
very-
in
which is
public
very-
they say that, but
my
I don't know what's
argument-
going on in the background.
This-
I mean, I don't know,
People say China did this, China did that. How the fuck do you know? Like Logo yesterday bringing up all these statistics, like how the fuck do you know that this is actually what's going on in China? Who brought those
yeah,
statistics?
we can't be entirely sure, but still, I think it's a fairly positive.
Yeah.
That to the extent, if
But-
there's reason to believe that, I mean, the HBD nerds were complaining, so I'm happy, you know.
But that's funny because you have like the spandrel like type of cinephile who are like,
Yeah.
you know, China, like Nick Land type, like Neo China is going to arrive from the future and bring the
Yeah, and then-
transhumanism.
yeah, and like- no,
and then you
Nick-
have like
Nick-
the logo type, like base G, like G is like realizing,
No,
like you
Nick
know,
Land was like exploding on Twitter, like about how China was betraying its destiny by refusing to use CRISPR. You know, like
Yeah.
that was hilarious.
Nick Land like hearing like Neo China through like some kind of like speed binge, listening to jungle music in the 90s, and taking away from him.
Yeah, listening to acid house and jungle music.
I have no idea how the hell Nick Land got so popular. I mean, seriously, like.
He was
Although
the
I
first dude.
want to get Nick Land on the stream though.
Oh,
so,
that'd be amazing.
yeah.
So no
I-
insulting.
No, I keep messaging the guy, and I would love for all
But
of you
you
guys
know,
to
He's
join.
Well, my
definitely
argument
interesting.
against-
I mean, Nick's an interesting
Yeah.
individual. I mean, it's not about like agreeing with him, but more about just like viewing him as like a kind of pure expression, like an unapologetic transhumanist.
I should tweet
Because,
about
I mean,
this.
that's really like behind all of this liberal sentiment is ultimately this
the
kind of,
the
I think-
outside.
yeah,
By the
and
way,
like he's
speaking-
one of the few people that'll actually
His,
like articulate it.
His biography is very fascinating because, like, basically he was this kind of like battalion, like delusion in the 90s,
Yeah.
like taking drugs, and
Fake
then for
Newman,
like basically for 10 years he like basically disappears from the public record, and suddenly he comes back reading Moldbug. Like, what the fuck?
I think I should tweet this. You know how Kojev said that the proper political philosopher should just slough off philosophy itself and commit to action. So then he went to become a bureaucrat and he founded the EU, right? I say that the Nick Land equivalent is Nick Land is kind of like Kojev, only his way of sloughing off political philosophy is by tweeting like a boomer conservative on Twitter. That's his project of actualization.
And by the way, speaking of unapologetic transhumanists, I had a conversation with Gennady Stolyarov II as far as the reverse debate goes. Now, I do have mixed news for you. I have mixed news. Okay.
Oh, no.
So, unfortunately, Gennady wrote to me the following. Greetings, Lev. Thank you for the invitation. While this may have been interesting for a formal debate exercise, I have to be mindful of my role as the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. While I am in that role, I think it would be unwise for me to publicly say anything critical about transhumanism, even in the context of a formal debate exercise. As we know, there are many people who intentionally misrepresent transhumanism and would jump at the opportunity to take my words out of context. I would always be happy to take a debate position in favor of transhumanism, though. Now, the good news, though, is that he referred me to another guy here who I'm not going to reveal yet just because I have to contact him and I have to see what's up, but he did refer me to somebody who is outside of the Transhumanist Party who may be able to do this. So we are going to have a reverse debate for the transhumanism discussion coming up, but also we are going to have the following things. Just wanted to quickly list this off. So first off, tomorrow is going to be a very big day. We're going to have Owen Cyclops back with us and Daniel Pinchbeck, the famous Daniel Pinchbeck who wrote Breaking Open the Head, who wrote 2012, the Coming of Quetzalcoatl. So this is the link over here. Psychedelic stream, please sign up for it. In fact, I'm going to make sure that when this stream is over, it's going to directly link to the psychedelic stream, so you guys could just like go right in there and set a reminder for it for tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern. And then we are also going to have on my channel, the Left stream, we are going to have an art stream that I'm going to be doing this Sunday with Aiden Paladin and Maiden Nomad. So that is coming up Sunday, 2 p.m. Be sure not to miss that. I'm going to be drawing my latest NFT over here. Gio, I hope you can join me as well. And
Are you concluding the stream, Lev? This seems like it's like you're winding things down.
I'm not saying I'm winding things down. This is
It
me.
feels like I feel like I'm being winded down. To be honest.
being down.
It's okay. I'm kind of down to be winded down. We've been doing this for like over 3 hours.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's been a while.
I got some stuff I gotta get.
There we go. Okay.
Well, one last point I will say
Yes.
about inheritance tax. The reason I bring it up is because the original point to me is, well, okay, not that it's to me, it's fundamentally alienating and bullshit and just terrible. It's just like people that don't have, like, come from upper class bourgeois families that hate their parents, like Vaush, they talk about this shit. But I would say that in terms of practicality, the original intent and purpose of it is kind of like a moot point because of modern finance capital. The people that are the richest people now, they didn't get that from their parents. They have created wealth through artifice. And so by limiting political influence by inheritance tax is kind of bullshit. I think you should Minecraft certain lobbyists before you should do that to like the average pizza, like fucking guy that has a pizzeria that wants to give it to his family.
Can I quote you on that, Gio?
What'd you say, Carsman?
Can I quote you on that?
Redacting certain lobby. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
About Minecrafting, yeah. Okay.
Minecrafting lobbyists.
Yeah. By the way, we keep getting definitely legitimate here. Let me see if I can actually show you guys the definitely legit wooden magnet. Just give me a second. Gio, now is the time for you to do some shout outs to the great people who are watching this right now. And everybody subscribe.
So I'm gonna hop off while you're doing that, and I'll listen to the shout outs later.
All right, thank you, my good friend.
Latest,
talk to y'all later.
Nice meeting you, Jake.
Nice to meet you.
And okay, so we're doing shout outs. So we have some favorites in the chat. Oh, Joel also left. Yeah. So let's see. We got Louis Cachet. Of course, we got my good friend Godward Podcast, my good friend Gomer, Muppetron, Buff as always, Facile Goose, Bulg Slayer. Of course,
Bulg Slayer, like the Byzantine emperor, like the Basil the Bulgar Slayer, I think.
Yeah, the Bulgar Slayer. Jules as always. Fallen Soldier. What is Jules? I think Jules made that joke. The boogers.
Yeah, this is like radio graffiti by Ghost, man.
Yeah, I know it is. Who we got here? We got Geo the Air. Oh, shut up, Geo. We got
Cans.wave.
Cans.wave. Yeah, look at you playing your ridiculous wave files. We got in the chat. We got Ovens for Lev. Shut up with the Ovens for Lev.
Jesus Christ, what is going on?
So we got Oak Wayne.
Implement chat room martial law engineer.
Implement chat room martial law. I love Ghost.
That was a great show, but like Ghost.
Yeah,
he's still around, isn't he?
He is still around, but
he totally sold out. You know, like basically, like I think what was he doing? Like basically, he gets people to pay him to like play YouTube clips. And like you get these like ridiculous like 12-hour streams. Like
he gets kicked off on like every service he goes on to. I think he's on P2 Network or whatever it's called.
By the way, I forgot to mention, we are also going to have Bimbo Ubermensch coming in.
The Sympacalypse stream.
Yes, next Tuesday. Here we go.
We're going to have another women's stream. It's going to be Bimbo Ubermensch, our good friend Chaotic Girl, our good friend Default Friend, and also Athena Hyatt. So it's going to be pretty... it's going to be amazing. I'm going to have to put my A game up. So then we have Facile Goose. We got Anthony Maneria. I think that's how you spell it. We all, Buff. Who else we got? Chat. I think that's pretty much.
By the way, okay, here we go. I'm about to show off the new definitely legit magnet.
Boy.
Definitely legit. I don't know where you are, buddy, if you're watching this right now.
Is this the $20 Patreon?
Here it is. Here is the definitely legit magnet. I'm going to zoom in on it over here. So here you have the magnet, and look how nice and shiny it is. And here you have the other side. You can see this big magnet. This is going to hold it up.
And that's for the $20 Patreon.
Yes,
people.
This is for the $20 patrons. You are going to get a beautiful wooden magnet. We can make more of these. I don't know what Definitely Legit thinks of it, but I'm sure that he's going to enjoy this Definitely Legit magnet. And for the $5 patrons, patreon.com/breaktherules, you are going to get the percolator status on our Discord, which means you are going to get to post images in the BTR chat, much like you saw me doing today. Whenever Buff was making a comment, I was posting an image of the bear the famous Russian worry bear punching you, which is one of my favorite of the images that we post here. Anyway, you can post the images. It's a right, not a... It's a privilege, not a right, so don't post porn or else you're going to get kicked. Anyway, you are also going to get, as a $5 patron, all of our MP3 version episodes. So after the stream, I render it as an MP3, put it on page available for the patrons first and foremost till it's before it's available to everybody else. $30 patrons are also going to get a beautiful print from the Grey Giovanni Panicchetti. Like always, I am going to load it up over here so you guys could see it in action. So here's the Patreon print. Look at Geo go. I'm too lazy to put it in the chat right now, but all of you who are watching this can see it. So patreon.com/breaktherules, $30 is going to give you this beautiful print. $50 is going to give you all of the above, as well as Jules Hamilton's very beautiful figures from the Warhammer series. I said it correctly this time, thank you. And you are also going to get another beautiful painting from Giovanni Panicchetti. And right now I'm working on your website, so pretty soon we're gonna have your website done, and that's gonna look good. I've seen it already. It already looks great, nice and crisp and fresh. So guys, invest in Geo, and also
invest in Lev.
Invest in Lev. That's
NFTs.
Right. Yes.
Although I did read this article by Angelicism, how NFTs are bullshit. But anyways, go ahead. Buy it.
Don't worry about that. Yeah, buy my NFT. Don't worry about it, guys.
No, but he was calling out these like art world people that are like capitalizing on it. Not you, Lev, of course.
Superrare.co/Lev Polyakov. Here you could see this guy. This is one of my latest works over here. Peer Reminder. This is a like an astral realm projection pyramid thing that these two characters look into, and this is he, Peer Reminder, nice and shiny and beautiful. So you guys can invest in Lev early on right now, because I am only going to keep growing right now with BTR, with the left stream. I am taking over National Arts Club, all that good stuff. This is happening this year. This year is the summer of Lev, and so is next summer, bitch. Anyway, that being said, I love all of you. You guys are great. You guys are beautiful, lovely people. And I think the last thing we're going to do is plugs. So let us plug away the Prudentialist. The Prudentialist, you have a YouTube series, and you also have a Twitter. Is there anything else you would like me to plug?
Come over to my the Sunday stream that I have on my channel every Sunday. I cover foreign policy and international relations, and I try to provide it from a realist perspective. That way you're not getting sort of the think tank foreign policy establishment BS. This is what I studied, this is what I love talking about, and this is what you'll get every week from me on the Sunday stream.
Please follow the Prudentialist on YouTube over here, and also you have a subscribe star, my friend, don't you?
I sure do. Please help me, take care. Help me out here. I'm using it to buy a new microphone equipment and buy an Adobe Premiere so I can make better video production quality. I've been taking a class, so I'm excited to grow and keep on doing bigger and better things.
Excellent. The Prudentialist on Subscribestar. And also, we had Joel Davis here. Joel Davis is not here right now, but I am still going to plug his stuff, as well as Childerberg. So, guys, follow Joel Davis on Twitter over here, twitter.com/JoelDavisX.
And there you can find first his journal and the Imperium cast as well, that he is also co-host of. And Childerberg is also in the link to Jake's
and also
Twitter.
speaking of Childerberg, I don't know if he got a chance to say this before he left, but there was a very wonderful commission that he commissioned me and my dad to do, which is the shirt. So Childerberg is going to be an actual event, a libertarian event. It's located, I believe, in the Muleshoe Blend Recreation area in Texas. So I want to see where exactly this is, but this is his brainchild, and I'm going to show you a picture of the shirt that we did with a very hot-looking girl wearing it. You cannot see her face, unfortunately. I'm sure her face is...
It's Bronze Age pervert marketing right there. Delicious tacos marketing.
Yeah, so here it is. Just take a look at this. This is the shirt. This is the shirt that I designed with my dad, Childerberg 3. You could see the demon over here, the guy cutting the pyramid. Let me see if I could find a better image here. The one that's not being worn by the person. Oh, here it is. Okay, I think this could be... Let's see, is this a good one? And again, subscribe. Everybody who did not subscribe yet, you know you want to, you know you need to. You need to subscribe to break the rules, so keep subscribing right now. Get your friends to subscribe. You know the deal. Anyway, here it is. Here is the picture that I wanted to share with you. So this is the This is the picture over here of all the monsters gathered together. Let me see if I can zoom in on this thing. Yes, I can. So here you can see Bigfoot. You could see the, what's his name, the Jersey Devil. You could see the horned goat man here cutting the pyramid eye that looks kind of nervous, the Eye of Providence. The frog man's playing with the alien. There's like some psychedelic mushrooms on the ground. A lot of fun stuff going on there. So that is Childerberg. Childerberg 3
and presumably they all do drugs to defeat the New World Order, which we were going to talk about tomorrow with Daniel Pinchbeck and Noah Cyclops about doing drugs to defeat the New World Order.
We'll definitely get there. So, and last but not least, my friend Nigel Carlsbad coming in here in the last minute. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we never plug his blog.
Yeah, we got to plug the blog right now. So where can we find your blog, my friend?
Oh, it's carlsbad1819.wordpress.com. It's in my Twitter account.
There it is, right here. You see it right on the screen. Everything you can reference in the chat. Speaking of the chat, by the way, I was always talking about how percolators get the privilege of posting images as well as having secret forums inside of our Discord. But actually, the link to the Discord itself is right here. I am pasting the link to the Discord. Guys, join our Discord today. Become a member of Break the Rules. We are breaking new ground every day thanks to your help, and we really appreciate the ever loving shit out of you. You guys are amazing. I love you guys. Anyway, Nigel Carlsbad, the Prudentialist, and Gio. Gio, do you have anything in the works right now that we should know about? Because I'm about to plug your YouTube channel.
I'm trying to go back to writing a bit. I do have an article I submitted for my good friend Lapis Lima's website, Substack, Covidian Aesthetics, which is a bit of a personal account of my own experience, and but also like just a reflection on the last 2 years. And other than that, I have this a number, like I've just been slacking on the writings. I've mostly been focusing on printmaking, but I do have a new etching that I'm going to release either tomorrow or Saturday, which is all of the cast of the legendary End of History stream part 2 that we just had yesterday, the day before. So
for those who don't know that stream, that was an amazing
it was
show.
Literally a transcendental experience for me. But so
and here is the link to it, by the way. I'm posting it in the chat for all of you who are not aware of it. Here it is: individualism versus the masses. One of my favorite parts of this is Logo's smokestacks over here. His little halo, his little vape halo.
I think it's such a good mix when we have you, me, Bard, Logo, Joel, and John Pellich, but also the addition of Paul Town. To me, was like really significant as well. And that was just, I had such a blast. I had such a, I really felt, I'm going to cry right now. So this is the end of the stream. So
yes, no. It's the end of the stream when I say it's the end of the stream, when I actually find the actual icon to click on to end it. This has nothing to do with my left Polyakov authoritarianism. What it does have to do with is just me being lazy and not having the thing in front of me when I should. But also patreon.com. Here's the patreon.com link one more time.
And also we have to get Paul Town as well will come on again. But whenever we have something to do with foreign policy and foreign affairs, we will also bring back my good friend here, the Prudentialist. So I feel that, it'd be pretty good. We always try to get the right people for the right job. So
absolutely.
Maybe we could have Prudentialist on with our good friend Nicolo Salo if he ever decides to come.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
And one more thing. This is key. Our next debate stream, the reverse debate that I want to have, and I really need your help here. We have a lot of Christians who are watching this right now, which is very important about what I'm about to say. I want to do a reverse debate, pagan versus Christian.
Oh God!
Now this is gonna
be no, don't even.
This is gonna be the toughest thing in the world. I already got a couple of rejections. So yeah.
Oh my God, we're gonna get like Sunny versus classic theist.
I mean, you're basically asking people to commit blasphemy. I mean,
yeah, it's not gonna work. Don't take that debate seriously, folks. That's not gonna work.
Oh man. Yeah, that'll be funny. Okay, well, we'll see what happens. I'm gonna keep an open mind. Maybe somebody is going to come on and do this. But anyway, guys, this is the end of the stream. I appreciate everybody being here. Hold on, I had the here we go. Okay, good night, everybody. Subscribe.
All right.
God bless.
Take care.
Take care. Bye bye.